Chapter 301, Third Mission, 8. Of course, the sky didn't literally rip apart. That would have required more paperwork. But anyone looking up at that moment would have been forgiven for thinking someone had taken a celestial can opener to the heavens and pried them open just a crack, just enough to let something truly unpleasant through. That something was Vorgoth Ironmaw. Pope of the Savage Communion, warlord of the 10,000 dismembered, and general enthusiast of mayhem, bloodshed, and axes roughly the size of mid-sized vehicles. The moment his weapon came down, it didn't feel like an attack so much as a statement, namely, this planet is in my way. And yet, Grand Marshal Maelin Potton, stoic, practical, terrifyingly composed Maelin, met it. One swing. One block. And for a breathless heartbeat, the world didn't end. Around her, the air rippled with summoned power. A Dullahan shimmered into being beside her, head held beneath one arm and eyes glowing with cold detachment. An arch-lich rose on the other side, tall and ancient and slightly offended to be summoned at this hour. And anchoring them all was the most impressive of the lot, Maelin herself, clad in an armor of interlocking deep blue bone, swirling with energy so dense it made Erebus look like a first-year illusion spell. Kraken skeleton, Luna whispered in my head, voice unusually subdued. Right. A kraken. A 9-star beast. One of those creatures people tell horror stories about at military academies, usually right before sending students into a forest with a butter knife and a prayer. And Maelin had worn it. Like a jacket. Her scythe crackled with enough power to power a small city, or at least wipe one off the map, and her face was as impassive as always, like she was scolding a particularly unruly vending machine. Vorgoth, of course, looked delighted. The Pope of the Savage Communion, one of the 5, a butcher in the body of a mountain with miasma seething from every pore, stood with his axe humming with both miasma and mana, as if it couldn't decide which apocalypse it preferred and had settled for both. Why was he here? That was the question. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not now. Not yet. This wasn't in the novel. So why here? Why now? The vehicle was going further away, but what was the point? I knew. Maelin was monstrously strong, but she wasn't a radiant rancor. She hadn't taken that step. She was weaker than Vorgoth. She would die in this fight. The truth of this realization hit me like a physical blow even as the hover truck continued to retreat. Rachel's fingers dug into my arm, her eyes wide with horror as she watched what was unfolding. Rose's face had gone pale, her usual composure cracking. Even Clana was fully awake, her expression grim. "We have to go back," I said, the words torn from me before I could think better of it. "You heard the marshal's orders," the driver replied, not taking his eyes off the path ahead. "We're to return to the outpost and report." Behind us, the battle began in earnest. Maelin moved first, her scythe carving a perfect arc through the air as she activated her scythe domain. The space around her warped, reality bending to accommodate her mastery of the weapon. Each swing didn't just travel through space but seemed to define it, creating zones where her control was absolute. It wasn't the highest level of martial ability, that would be unity, the perfect melding of self and weapon, but it was close. Vorgoth parried with contemptuous ease, his axe unity allowing him to counter as if the weapon were a natural extension of himself. Where Maelin's scythe domain created zones of control, his axe unity simply ignored them, cutting through the fabric of her technique with the casual disregard of someone swatting a fly. "Is this all the Western continent can offer?" he taunted, his voice like gravel being crushed. "Their second strongest?" Maelin didn't bother responding with words. Instead, darkness gathered around her, not the purple-black of conventional dark mana, but the absolute void of deep dark. It pooled around her like liquid night, then surged forward in jagged spears aimed at Vorgoth's heart. The Axe King laughed, a sound like mountains collapsing. Fire erupted from his body, not natural flame but miasma-infused inferno, sick green and sunset orange intertwined in a blasphemous dance. The deep dark spears met his fire miasma in a catastrophic collision, the resulting shockwave flattening the terrain for half a kilometer in all directions. The Dullahan and Arch-Lich moved in perfect synchronization with Mei Lin, as if the three shared a single mind. The Lich hurled spells of such complexity they resembled mathematical equations made lethal, while the Dullahan's sword left trails of absolute cold in its wake. Together with Mei Lin's scythe, they created a three-pronged attack that would have annihilated most opponents. Vorgoth was not most opponents. His axe blurred, becoming less a weapon and more a concept, the idea of severance made manifest. Where it passed, connections broke. The Lich's spells unraveled mid-flight. The Dullahan's sword strikes hit nothing but air. And Mei Lin's scythe, meeting the axe directly, shuddered under the impact. For a moment, they were locked together, power against power. Mei Lin's face remained impassive, but sweat beaded on her forehead, the first sign of strain I'd ever seen from her. Vorgotha's expression was one of fierce joy, like a connoisseur sampling a particularly fine vintage. "You fight well, human," he acknowledged, pushing forward. "Few can stand against me for even this long." Mei Lin disengaged, leaping backward as her summons regrouped. The crack in armor around her flickered, parts of it crumbling under the strain of channeling so much power. She raised her hand, and the deep dark responded again, this time forming complex geometric patterns that rotated around her like the world's most lethal mathematical model. "Vorgoth Ironmaw," she finally spoke, her voice steady despite everything. "You're a long way from your temples." "The world is my temple," he replied, rolling his massive shoulders. "And all battlefields my altar." He raised his axe high, and the sky itself seemed to darken in response. Fire miasma spiraled around the weapon, condensing until the blade glowed white-hot. At the same time, he channeled pure mana through it, not the refined, controlled mana of human mages, but raw, primal power that made the air itself groan in protest. "But enough talk," he said, his voice dropping to a rumble. "Show me what the Grand Marshal of the Western Continent can really do." The attack that followed defied description. It wasn't just an axe strike, it was annihilation given form, a concept rather than a physical action. The air split, the ground beneath it sublimated, and reality itself seemed to protest. Mei Lin met it with everything she had. Deep dark erupted from her in a catastrophic wave, her summons dissolving into it, lending their power to hers. The Kraken armor fully activated, ancient runes blazing across its surface as it channeled power that no human frame should have been able to contain. Her scythe, wreathed in both deep dark and death energy from her gift, swept up to meet Vorgotha's descending axe. The collision was beyond spectacular, it was nearly biblical. Light and darkness, fire and void, miasma and mana, all crashing together in a single point of cosmic absurdity. For one impossible moment, the two forces balanced, neither yielding. Then, slowly, inexorably, Vorgotha's axe began to push through. Mei Lin's defense cracked. The deep dark wavered. The Kraken armor fractured along ancient fault lines. And still, her expression remained composed, accepting, as if she'd always known this would be the outcome. With a sound like the world ending, her defense shattered completely. The backlash hurled her backward, her body carving a trench through the earth before coming to rest nearly 50 meters away. Her scythe lay broken beside her, its blade cracked clean through. The Kraken armor hung in tatters, more suggestion than substance now. Vorgoth lowered his axe, looking almost disappointed that it was over. He approached slowly, savoring the moment, his massive form casting a long shadow over Mei Lin's fallen figure. "You fought well," he repeated, and there was genuine respect in his voice. "Few humans have ever forced me to exert myself to this degree. Had you taken that final step, had you reached Radiant rank, perhaps this would have ended differently." Mei Lin struggled to her knees, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. Her golden eyes remained defiant despite everything. "It's not over," she said quietly. "No?" Vorgoth raised his axe once more. "Then show me." She gathered what little strength remained, deep dark flickering weakly around her hands. But it was clear to everyone watching that it was over. The gap between peak immortal and low radiant might seem small on paper, but in reality, it was an unbridgeable chasm. "Why?" she asked, staring up at him. Why come yourself? Why now? Vorgitha's massive head tilted slightly. Because change is coming. The balance shifts. And I wished to see for myself what the Western continent could offer against that tide. The axe began its descent, a perfect execution stroke that would separate Malin's head from her shoulders with surgical precision. I don't remember making the decision to move. One moment I was in the hover truck, watching in horror. The next, I was standing between Malin and Vorgith, Erebus drawn and raised to meet his axe. The impact when our weapons met should have shattered every bone in my body. Should have. But it didn't. Erebus blazed with a light I'd never seen before, absorbing and redirecting the catastrophic force of Vorgitha's strike. My arms trembled, my legs threatened to buckle, but somehow, impossibly, I held. Well, he said, his voice somewhere between amused and intrigued. What do we have here? Chapter 302, Third Mission, 9. Of course, Vorgith held back against me. If he hadn't, I would have obviously died, no questions asked. There wouldn't have been enough of me left to fill a thimble, just a fine red mist and perhaps one boot sailing through the air in a tragically comical arc. I was too weak to hope to withstand him. The gap between us wasn't just a gap, it was a canyon so wide you couldn't see the other side through the clouds. Like comparing a kitchen match to a supernova. A paper cut to the Grand Canyon. Well, you get the idea. So why did I? Well, it was logical. Vorgith Ironmaw was the least rational of all the 5 popes. This made him both the most and least dangerous of them. His unpredictability was a weapon in itself. No model could predict what someone would do when their decision tree looked like it had been drawn by a toddler during an earthquake. In the end, he moved according to his base desires. And what he desired was to kill the strongest. To face worthy opponents, to test himself against them, to feel the thrill of challenging combat. He was a connoisseur of violence, a sommelier of battle who found the bouquet of weak opponents distastefully bland. In the end, I was way too weak to hope to fight against him. But I could give him an impulse. I could be interesting enough to make him curious rather than immediately homicidal. That was the way for me to survive. Nightingale, did you not go? Malin began, her voice strained through gritted teeth, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. Even on her knees, broken and defeated, she maintained that aura of command. You defied my order. Yes, Grand Marshal, I replied, not taking my eyes off Vorgitha's massive form. The Orc Pope towered over us both, his green skin crisscrossed with ritual scars that pulsed with internal power. His tusks gleamed in the strange half-light created by the residual energy of their battle. Because I will save you. Erebus trembled in my arm, the weapon humming with a frequency I'd never felt before. It wasn't just vibrating, it was resonating, like it recognized something in Vorgitha's axe, some kindred quality that both attracted and repelled it. For the first time in a long time, I was genuinely afraid. Not the kind of fear that gets your heart pumping before a test or a difficult fight. This was primal, cellular-level terror, the kind that makes your organs try to find the nearest exit. My mouth went dust-dry, and time seemed to stretch like taffy. The man in front of me was as strong as Evelyn Alaric, Alastair Creighton, Charlotte Alaric and the others at the peak. Beings whose casual gestures could level cities, whose disagreements reshaped coastlines. The only one who could beat him 100% of the time was Magnus Dracar, the Martial King. But I believed in my knowledge of him. I'd studied every scrap of information about the 5 popes, analyzed every recorded engagement, memorized their patterns and preferences. Knowledge was power, not enough power to win, but maybe enough to survive. So I moved forward. In a burst of wind magic, with time magic accelerating me and my sword wrapped in deep dark, I closed the distance between us. The wind gathered beneath my feet, propelling me forward like a bullet. Time slowed around me, or rather, I moved faster relative to it, everything else seeming to crawl while I operated at normal speed. Deep dark coiled around Erebus, not just covering the blade but seeming to extend it, to make it both more and less real simultaneously. And I swung down. The strike was perfect, or it should have been. The culmination of thousands of hours of training, the precise application of multiple magical disciplines, the ideal angle of attack against even the most formidable opponent. My sword was stopped by the mere miasma emanating from him. Not his weapon, not his armor, not even his skin. Just the aura of corrupted energy that surrounded him like a toxic cloud. Erebus hit it and simply halted, as if I'd tried to cut through the concept of solidity itself. Are you trying to excite me with this? Vorgoth asked, his voice like continents grinding together. He hadn't even bothered to move, still standing in exactly the same position, his axe resting casually against his shoulder. His eyes, an unsettling orange red, like the heart of a dying star, regarded me with the mild interest one might show a moderately unusual insect. I'm just getting started, I responded as I gritted my teeth, enamel creaking under the pressure. Sweat beaded on my forehead, not from exertion but from the raw, crushing presence of being so close to something so absurdly powerful. I activated soul resonance. The strongest ability I wanted. The strongest. It was right in front of me. That strike which destroyed the sky itself. The technique that had shattered Malin's defenses like glass, that had broken through deep dark and death energy and the armor of a 9-star beast as if they were no more substantial than morning mist. Arthur, Luna said, her voice unusually urgent in my mind, don't try. I ignored her. That axe unity of Vorgoth. I focused on it with every fiber of my being, every neuron, every mode of mana in my system. I stared not at the physical axe but at the concept behind it, the perfect melding of wielder and weapon, the dissolution of boundaries between self and tool until they became a single entity expressing a single purpose. I could see it now, really see it. Not just the physical movements but the underlying structure. It was like looking at the source code of reality itself, lines of cosmic programming that defined how object and wielder interacted. Vorgoth and his axe weren't two things, they were one thing that happened to occupy two spaces. The axe didn't move because he swung it, it moved because it was him, an extension of his will made manifest in steel and malice. I copied it. And molded it to fit me. Into my own sword unity. Instantly, I felt my mind go blank as it was filled with information. It was like trying to pour an ocean into a teacup. Data, understanding, awareness, it all flooded in, overwhelming my consciousness in a tidal wave of pure comprehension. Too much. This was too much. Imagine trying to understand everything at once, not just facts but the relationships between them, the metastructures that gave them meaning, the patterns that connected them across time and space. Imagine having the entire library of human knowledge downloaded directly into your brain in the span of a heartbeat, without index or organization. My vision blurred, darkness encroaching from the edges. Blood vessels burst in my eyes, tiny red spiderwebs spreading across my field of view. I could feel something fundamental beginning to give way, like structural beams groaning before collapse. Luna, filter this. I yelled internally as I felt her presence lighten the burden. She moved through my consciousness like a master librarian, categorizing, prioritizing, shelving what could wait and highlighting what was immediately crucial. The flood didn't stop, but suddenly there were channels, dams, reservoirs to manage it. My nose bled as pure light encased my sword. Not droplets but a stream, metallic and warm on my upper lip. The pure light wasn't the usual soft golden glow but something harsher, more demanding, a white-hot brilliance that seemed to cut through reality itself, leaving afterimages burned into the air. I couldn't copy Unity, it was too high level. Like trying to run cutting-edge software on obsolete hardware, my mind simply lacked the capacity to fully contain and execute such a concept. The information was there, but my ability to process and implement it was insufficient. But this was the next evolution of my God Flash. The technique I'd been developing, refining, pushing to its limits. A momentary perfect synchronization between myself and my weapon, not the permanent, continuous unity that Vorgoth achieved, but a single instant of absolute harmony. If unity was a perfect marriage, this was a perfect first date, brief, but potentially life-changing. God Flash, absolute. I felt it crystallize within me, the technique taking shape not just as movement but as understanding. For just one moment, one attack, I could achieve what Vorgoth maintained effortlessly, the dissolution of boundaries between wielder and weapon, the expression of pure martial will. Erebus wasn't just glowing now, it was transforming, responding to the change in me. The blade elongated, not physically but conceptually, becoming more than a sword, more than a tool. For this single instant, it was an idea given form, the platonic ideal of a cutting edge. Vorgoth saw it. I knew he did. His eyes widened slightly, the casual disinterest replaced by something sharper, more focused. The recognition of something unexpected. Something potentially interesting. His axe moved from his shoulder, almost lazily, as if he were merely shifting its position for comfort rather than preparing to counter my attack. Time compressed around us, the world narrowing to just this moment, just this exchange. Everything else, Malin's labored breathing, the distant sound of the hover truck, the wind across the wasteland, faded into irrelevance. I exhaled once, fully, completely, emptying my lungs of air and my mind of doubt. Then I struck. Chapter 303, Third Mission, 10. The collision between my god Flash, Absolute and Vorgoth's casual defense wasn't so much a meeting of forces as it was a brief, one-sided conversation. My attack, the culmination of everything I had, everything I was, compressed into a single perfect moment of martial expression, met his axe. And stopped. Not dramatically. Not with some cosmic explosion or reality-shattering backlash. It just ceased. Like a wave breaking against a cliff face, all that power and momentum simply dissipated, leaving nothing behind but a faint ripple in the air. Vorgoth hadn't even swung his axe. He'd merely raised it, letting my strike land. Evilus, glowing with pure light, touched the edge of his weapon and could go no further. Vorgoth said. Just that. One syllable containing more evaluation than most doctoral dissertations. He tilted his head, eyes gleaming as he regarded me with new interest. Those volcanic eyes narrowed slightly, no longer seeing just another insect but something worthy of actual attention. Sword intent, he said, the words falling from his mouth like stones. Without even reaching low integration rank. I didn't respond. Couldn't, really. The backlash from attempting God Flash, Absolute had left me momentarily hollow, my mana circuit scorched, my nervous system jangling like overtuned piano wire. I could taste blood in my mouth, feel it trickling from my ears. My vision kept trying to split into two separate images that refused to align properly. Interesting, Vorgoth continued, sounding genuinely thoughtful. Very interesting. A human who can glimpse unity without the requisite power base. The potential. He was still talking when the world around us erupted in golden light. One moment we stood on barren ground, the next, golden roses burst from the earth in a cascading wave, their stems intertwining to form a rapidly expanding dome around Vorgoth. The flowers weren't just beautiful, they were saturated with pure light so intense it made the air shimmer, a direct counter to the miasma that surrounded the Axe King. Rachel. Her distinctive energy signature was unmistakable. At the same time, reality itself seemed to hiccup. The space around Vorgoth twisted, dimensions folding in on themselves in a way that made my eyes water just watching it. Simple physics, things like direction, distance, and even time, became more like suggestions than rules within that warped bubble. Rose. Her paradox manipulation reaching levels I'd never seen before. They hadn't fled with the truck. Of course they hadn't. They had doubled back, waited for the right moment, and were now launching a coordinated attack against a being that could snuff out planets. If I hadn't been so busy trying not to collapse, I might have laughed at the sheer audacity of it all. Vorgoth, to his credit, didn't immediately obliterate them. Instead, he looked around at the golden rose garden with something approaching appreciation, like a man admiring an unexpectedly interesting piece of street art. The Saintess's purification, he observed. And reality distortion as well. More interesting specimens. Then he laughed, a sound like an avalanche set to music, terrible and magnificent at once. The miasma around him intensified, shifting from a passive aura to an active force. Green-black energy spiraled outward in a shockwave, tearing through the golden roses and shattering the warped space as if they were no more substantial than soap bubbles. The backlash sent Rachel and Rose tumbling backward. They'd been hiding behind a ridge about 50 meters away, but the force of Vorgotha's casual dismissal of their attack hurled them into the open, their bodies leaving small trenches in the ground as they skidded to a halt near Maylin and me. "Was that your plan?" Vorgoth asked, sounding amused rather than angry. "A distraction while your friends attacked?" "Not entirely without merit, but..." He gestured at the devastation around us, the golden rose petals now withering and crumbling to dust. "Inadequate." I managed to stand straighter, placing myself between the Axe King and my fallen comrades. Erebus felt unnaturally heavy in my hand, but I raised it nonetheless. "We're not done," I said, though my voice sounded distant even to my own ears. "No," Vorgoth agreed, surprising me. "You're not." "Not yet." He studied the four of us, Maylin still on her knees but defiant, Rachel and Rose struggling to rise, me barely standing, with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. There was amusement there, certainly, but also something else. Something almost like approval. "You know," he said conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather rather than the imminent end of our lives, "it's been a long time since humans have surprised me. A very long time." He lowered his axe, resting its head on the ground. The impact sent small tremors through the earth. "I came here to test the Western continent's defenses. To see if they warranted my personal attention." His gaze moved to Maylin. "The Grand Marshal fought well. Better than I expected. But still, not enough to concern me." Then his eyes found mine again. "But you are unexpected." A white rank wielding sword intent. Glimpsing unity without the foundation to support it. He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "There is potential there. Potential that would be wasted if I simply crushed you now." He reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew something that glowed with sickly green light in his massive palm. "I propose an oath," he said. "A mana and miasma oath. Binding and unbreakable." I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. Oaths of this nature weren't offered lightly, especially not by beings of Vorgotha's stature. "What kind of oath?" I asked, caution overriding exhaustion. Vorgotha's mouth stretched into what might generously be called a smile. 8 years, he said. "In 8 years, you and I will duel to the death. 1-on-1. No interference, no escape. A proper battle between worthy opponents." I could feel Rachel and Rose tensing behind me. Even Maylin's breath caught. "And in return?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "In return, I spare you today. All of you." His gaze swept over our small group. "And I will not attack the Western continent. For now. Not until our appointed time. 8 years. 8 years of peace for the frontier. 8 years for me to grow, to prepare, to reach the levels I would need to even have a chance against him. 8 years until certain death. Or perhaps not so certain. The future wasn't fixed. 8 years was a lot of time to change, to evolve, to find advantages that even Vorgoth couldn't anticipate. I glanced back at my companions. Rose's face was pale but composed, her analytical mind clearly racing through scenarios and probabilities. Rachel looked terrified but resolute, her hands still glowing faintly with golden energy. And Maylin. Maylin's expression was unreadable, but she gave me the smallest of nods. Permission. Understanding. Maybe even a hint of respect. I turned back to Vorgoth. "I accept." 8 years, Arthur Nightingale, Vorgoth said, my name sounding strange in his rumbling voice. "Grow strong. Reach your potential. Become worthy of a glorious death." With that, he turned and strode away. The air split before him, just as it had when he arrived, and he stepped through the rift without looking back. The tier sealed itself behind him, leaving only disturbed air and devastated landscape as evidence he'd ever been there. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by our ragged breathing and the faint sound of wind across the wasteland. "Arthur," Rachel finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you just make a death pact with one of the popes?" I finished for her. "Yeah. I think I did." 8 years, Rose murmured, calculations practically visible behind her eyes. Maylin struggled to her feet, her usually immaculate uniform torn and stained with blood. The Kraken armor had completely disintegrated, leaving only faint blue residue on her skin. "That," she said, her voice raspy but steady, "was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever witnessed. Possibly both." "He would have killed us all otherwise," I pointed out. She nodded. "Yes. He would have." Her golden eyes studied me with new intensity. 8 years. The Western continent gets 8 years of peace because of what you did today. Put like that, it sounded almost noble. A sacrifice for the greater good. But we all knew better. This wasn't nobility, it was desperation, opportunism, and perhaps a bit of calculated gambling. "We should get back to the outpost," Maylin said, all business despite her injuries. "There's much to discuss. Much to prepare." As we made our way back to the hover truck, which had returned once Vorgoth departed, I could feel the weight of what had just happened settling over me. Not just the oath itself, but what it represented. A deadline, in the most literal sense of the word. I touched my chest, feeling the faint pulse of the oath beneath my skin. It wasn't just a promise. It was a timer, counting down with each heartbeat. 8 years to live. 8 years to become someone who could defy those odds. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to save everyone, I'd bound myself to a death sentence. But perhaps that had always been my path. Perhaps this was just making official what had always been inevitable. "A clever move," Luna commented, breaking her unusual silence. "Dangerous, but clever." "How do you figure?" I asked silently. 8 years is a long time, she replied. "It will be enough," I replied. If I couldn't even beat a pope in 8 years, I wasn't good enough to survive in the future of this world. Chapter 304, Third Mission, 11. Arthur sat in the chair like a man awaiting trial, except the judge was smiling at him like a shark with tenure. The headmaster's office smelled faintly of cinnamon and administrative disapproval, a curious blend that somehow amplified the sensation of being in profound trouble. Across from him, Headmaster Eva Lopez had her hands folded in front of her, her violet eyes gleaming with that specific light reserved for paperwork disasters and students who somehow survived things they absolutely shouldn't have. The late afternoon sun filtering through her office windows cast her silvery hair in a halo that did nothing to soften the predatory curve of her smile. "Arthur," she said, voice sweet enough to cause cavities, "I just need to know one little thing." Arthur blinked. "Yes?" He attempted to look appropriately contrite, though the effect was somewhat undermined by the fact that he was still wearing his field uniform, complete with scorch marks and what appeared to be miasma-tinged dust. "Why is it," she began, tapping one perfectly manicured nail against her desk with metronomic precision, "that every single time, you go somewhere, something explodes, implodes, or starts a small war?" He opened his mouth. She raised a hand, the gesture reminiscent of someone halting an advancing army. "No, wait. I'm not finished. Because this time, you've managed to get the Pope of the Savage Communion to personally stroll onto a battlefield, nearly flatten one of the Western continent's immortal rank marshals, and then leave because of you." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing to violet slits. Arthur. Do you know what this means?" "I did well?" Arthur offered, somewhat hopefully, straightening in his chair as if good posture might somehow mitigate the enormity of what had happened. Eva stood up and began pacing, the sort of pacing that meant someone was either going to start a war or request a transfer to a nice quiet farming moon. Her heels clicked against the polished floor with the rhythmic intensity of a countdown sequence. Do well? Do well? You covered a disaster of your own making with heroism. It's like watching someone set a building on fire and then receive a medal for rescuing everyone inside. That's not fair, Arthur protested, indignation temporarily overriding his self-preservation instincts. It wasn't my mess. Vorgoth just showed up. I don't control the movements of popes. Yes. Where you were. She threw her hands up, a gesture that encompassed both Arthur and the apparent cosmic joke that was his existence. Of all the places in all the continents, he just happened to materialize exactly where you were standing. Coincidence? Arthur insisted, though even to his own ears the words sounded hollow. Arthur, when you sneeze, 3 guilds go bankrupt and a dragon comes out of retirement. Coincidences don't orbit you like moons, they crash into you at terminal velocity. Arthur leaned back, folding his arms across his chest, a defensive posture that did little to hide the stubborn set of his jaw. Look, I did save Marshal Malin. That counts for something, right? Yes, and now the entire Western Front thinks you're some kind of prodigal war god sent from the heavens to smite miasmic heretics with good hair and teenage angst. She pinched the bridge of her nose, a gesture that seemed to be restraining an impressive arsenal of profanity. Do you have any idea how complicated this makes diplomacy? The other academies are already sending inquiries. The southern continent wants a formal explanation. I have 17 messages from various military commands asking if you're available for strategic consultation, which is bureaucrat speak for, can we borrow your walking catastrophe for a while? But it wasn't my fault, Arthur said, holding firm, though a traitorous part of his mind whispered that trouble did seem to find him with uncanny precision. Eva sighed, rubbing her temples like she was trying to massage out a full-scale war. The gesture softened her momentarily, revealing the genuine concern beneath her exasperation. You're not a student, Arthur. You're a seasonal event. You're what happens when the universe decides the status quo has gotten too comfortable. She sat back down, looking at him with an expression that said she would love to strangle him but unfortunately needed him alive for several international agreements. I suppose next you'll tell me the Pope offered you tea. Arthur blinked. No. Just a duel. Eva closed her eyes. Of course. Of course he did. She took a deep breath, as if physically inhaling patience. Because a simple "I'll kill you later" would be too straightforward for an eldritch horror with anger management issues and an axe the size of a small country. An 8-year oath, Arthur said, with the calm composure of someone who had just agreed to a friendly match of chess and not a duel with a mass-murdering fire god. In 8 years, Vorgoth and I will fight, as per the mana and miasma oath we made. Eva slumped into her chair with all the grace of a queen resigning from her throne. Ugh, she muttered into her hands. Of course. Of course he made an oath. What's next? Tea and scones with a demon lord. Perhaps a friendly game of cards with the Bone Witch of the Northern Wastes. She looked at Arthur, who looked entirely too pleased with himself for someone who had essentially provoked one of the world's most terrifying warlords into putting him on a magical hit list with a countdown timer. The boy had a gift for turning catastrophe into opportunity that would be admirable if it wasn't so terrifying. Well, she said, pinching the bridge of her nose, as ridiculous as this all is, I suppose it was a good idea on your part. 8 years is a significant buffer. If anyone can surpass Vorgoth in 8 years, it's you. She paused, her expression shifting to something more calculating. Or so the betting pool currently says. Arthur brightened. Speaking of which, he said, in a tone that should have come with a contractual warning, I'd like a reward. Eva blinked at him, momentarily struck speechless. A reward? He nodded solemnly, as if requesting compensation for completing a particularly difficult homework assignment rather than surviving an encounter with an apocalyptic entity. Yes. I was placed in unfair danger due to the Academy's arrangements. This situation could have been avoided if proper security protocols had been in place or if the frontier had better intelligence networks. Also, I've essentially secured 8 years of peace for the Western continent. That's worth something, isn't it? Eva's teeth audibly clenched. Unfair danger? Arthur, this is a combat academy, not a tea party in a panic room. The brochure literally says, preparing tomorrow's leaders for a dangerous world. It doesn't specify that the dangerous world won't occasionally include encounters with ancient evils. Still, Arthur shrugged, the picture of reasonable entitlement. I was very nearly chopped in half by the Axe King. That's got to be worth at least a new training facility. Or some rare resources. Perhaps access to the restricted section of the library? Eva stared at him like she was deciding between giving him what he wanted or launching him into low orbit. You're very lucky you're cute, she muttered. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Pardon? Nothing, she snapped, spinning around to glare at a data screen as if it had personally offended her. You'll get your reward. Eventually. Something suitably ridiculous to match your habit of collecting world-ending enemies like trading cards. I'll have to consult with the board, of course. And the military. And possibly an exorcist, just to make sure you haven't been possessed by a chaos spirit. Arthur smiled, ever so slightly smug. Thank you, Headmaster. Your generosity is noted and appreciated. Out. Go. Before someone else declares war on you. Or worse, asks for your autograph. She waved a dismissive hand toward the door. And don't think we're done discussing this. The full debriefing will happen tomorrow, with the entire faculty present. I want to make sure everyone gets to enjoy watching you explain how you managed to turn a routine reconnaissance mission into an international incident. Arthur rose from his seat, offering a bow that managed to be both respectful and vaguely insolent at the same time. I look forward to it. Should I prepare visual aids? Get out. As Arthur turned to leave, Eva called after him, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. And Arthur? Try not to challenge any other deities to combat before dinner, would you? The cafeteria staff are still recovering from the last time you requested battle rations. Arthur grinned over his shoulder. No promises, Headmaster. But I'll do my best. The door closed behind him with a satisfying click, leaving Eva alone with her thoughts and the looming administrative nightmare that would undoubtedly follow. She sighed deeply, reaching for a crystal decanter on her desk that definitely didn't contain water. That boy, she murmured, is either going to save the world or destroy it. Possibly both, in that order. Outside the headmaster's office, Arthur found himself face to face with Marshal Maylin Potton. The immortal rank necromancer was leaning against the wall, arms folded, her golden eyes as unreadable as ever. Despite the recent battle, she looked immaculate, her blue hair perfectly arranged, her uniform spotless. Only the faint shadows beneath her eyes betrayed the strain of her encounter with Vorgoth. Nightingale, she said, her voice maintaining its usual flat cadence. I see you survived the headmaster. Arthur straightened instinctively. Marshal. I didn't expect to see you here. Clearly. She pushed away from the wall, studying him with that piercing gaze that seemed to catalogue every weakness and strength simultaneously. I came to thank you. Arthur blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Thank me? Is there an echo in this hallway? Maylin's expression didn't change, but something that might have been amusement flickered in her golden eyes. Yes. Thank you. For what you did on the frontier. It was reckless, stupid, and completely against orders. She paused. It was also the reason I'm still breathing. I couldn't just leave you there, Arthur said simply. Maylin studied him for a long moment. Most would have. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct, especially when faced with a being like Vorgoth. I'm not most people. No, she agreed. You're not. Which is why I've recommended you for the Star of Valor. The highest military decoration the Western continent can bestow on a civilian. Arthur's eyes widened. That's unexpected. So was watching a student stand between me and the Axe King. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched Maylin's lips. The commendation comes with certain privileges. Access to military archives. Priority requisition rights for rare materials. Things that might prove useful to someone preparing for a duel in 8 years. Understanding dawned in Arthur's eyes. That's very generous, Marshal. It's pragmatic, she corrected. Your survival serves the Western continent's interests. And she hesitated, something almost human flickering across her usually impassive features. And I pay my debts, Nightingale. Remember that. She straightened, once again the perfect image of military discipline. You have 8 years. Make them count. And when the time comes, she fixed him with that golden stare. Don't die. It would reflect poorly on my training. Chapter 305, Third Mission, 12. Ren's jaw clenched as the coppery taste of blood hit his tongue, thick and bitter as old coins. His boots dragged furrows through the cracked terrain, the soles grating against the earth like nails across glass. Every joint in his arms screamed as he held it aloft, the weight of his fists suddenly reminiscent of an angry planet, a crushing gravity that threatened to pull him into the dirt. His entire body trembled, not from fear, at least that's what he told himself, but from the slow, cruel collapse of a body being asked to do one thing too many. Each breath felt like inhaling broken glass, each heartbeat a thunderous toll that counted down to failure. The beast before him bellowed, a rumbling avalanche of sound that flattened the air. The miasmic bear, an absurdly overgrown slab of muscle and spite, was a 6-star monster of the sort normally reserved for military campaigns and cautionary bedtime tales. Its fur, dark as midnight and slick with corruption, rippled over muscles dense as iron. Ren's vision blurred, a smear of dark fur and hellish red eyes blotting out the sky. The bear's paw arced toward him like a collapsing mountain, trailing wisps of corrosive energy. His god's eyes flared to life, tracing the swipe with pinpoint accuracy, every muscle and tendon in the creature's massive limb rendered in perfect detail. He knew exactly where it would land, how much force it would carry, the precise angle at which his bones would shatter. Unfortunately, foreknowledge meant bugger all when your limbs moved like wet rope. He braced for the end, a strange calm washing over him despite everything. So this was how the story of Renkagu concluded, not as the second hero, but as a cautionary footnote in some other legend. And then the end didn't come. A clang of mana on miasma cracked the air like thunder, and the world jolted to a halt. The strike had been parried. Standing in front of him, casually, almost insultingly so, was Lucifer Windward. Blonde, smiling like he'd just strolled into a tea party instead of the jaws of death, and glowing with that bloody righteous light he always seemed to carry like it was stitched into his bones. Ren's body, no longer forced upright by sheer suicidal will, gave out. He slumped, one knee thudding against the ground, the rest of him not far behind. His breath came in shallow gasps as he watched the bear turn its fury to Lucifer. Lucifer, of course, looked thrilled. Looks like you're the leader of this little picnic, he said to the beast, white mana flooding around his sword in clean arcs. But it wasn't just aura. There was something else there now, something more refined, more concentrated, like liquid light given purpose and direction. Sword intent. Ren blinked, then blinked again, as if trying to dismiss the hallucination of advancement. He stared at the light dancing around the blade, the hum of the air bending to Lucifer's will, the perfect harmony between mana, weapon, and wielder. The bastard had done it. Reached sword intent before even scratching the surface of integration. Ren had trained until his skin bled and his mind frayed at the edges. He'd eaten, slept, and breathed combat, all because he carried the bloodline of the first hero, the weight of expectation draped across his shoulders like a leaden cloak. Every moment of his life had been preparation, every breath a step on a path laid out before his birth. And now here was Lucifer, golden boy of the gods, cutting down monsters like it was Tuesday, the light around his blades singing with a perfection that shouldn't have been possible yet. A bitter chuckle slipped from Ren's lips, tasting of blood and resignation. How unfair can you be, you damn god? He whispered to no one in particular, the words lost in the cacophony of battle. Above him, streaks of elemental light, fire, lightning, water, all wrapped in that pristine white mana, shot from Lucifer's form as he clashed with the miasma beast. Each movement was elegant, clean, and decisive. The bear roared again, this time in pain, its bulk recoiling from Lucifer's blade like darkness fleeing the dawn. Ren watched, chest hollow, as the battle unfolded. It wasn't jealousy. Not entirely. No. It was emptiness. The cold, quiet kind that came when you realized you were the supporting actor in someone else's legend. The bit player whose struggle would be condensed to a line or two in the story of someone greater. I too want to reach it, damn it, Ren thought as he gritted his teeth, feeling the enamel creak under the pressure. Did he not desire it enough? Had his hunger been insufficient, his ambition too tame? Did he not strive for it enough? Were the countless hours, the broken bones, the sleepless nights all just hollow gestures rather than true sacrifice? Then, did he not deserve it? I want it too, Ren said as his violet eyes gleamed with something raw and desperate, a hunger that transcended mere ambition. Ren had always crushed the weakest. That was his way of fighting. Not out of cruelty, though many saw it that way, but out of conviction. The strong defined the world, the weak inhabited it. To rise meant to step on those below, to ensure your place by proving others unworthy of theirs. He wanted to sit at the throne overlooking everyone else, not for the adulation, but for the validation that his path, his truth, was correct. He wanted to remove the unworthy ones, those who reached for greatness without the backbone to support it, those who played at being heroes without understanding the cost. That was why he had tried to crush Arthur. The boy without gift or bloodline who dared to stand in Class A, who presumed to walk among giants while bearing the stature of a common man. But even Arthur had surpassed him, closing gaps that should have been uncrossable, advancing with a speed that defied all logic and precedent. And Lucifer, who Ren had thought he was closing the gap to, who had always been ahead but at least within sight, had suddenly increased the distance by unlocking a second gift, by achieving sword intent as if it were nothing more significant than learning a new dance step. Why can I not reach it? Ren thought as he reached out to them in his mind, these boys who moved like men, these students who fought like legends. He saw them climbing heights he couldn't touch, standing on peaks he couldn't scale despite the blood in his veins, the legacy in his name. The level Arthur and Lucifer stood at. The level beyond him. He deserved it. By birth, by blood, by every drop of sweat and pain he had poured into his training. He needed to have it. Not just to fulfill expectations or silence critics, but because something in him would wither and die if he didn't. If he could have it, he would throw away everything. Pride, fear, doubt, restraint, all of it meaningless compared to the ascension he craved. Because all he had was his fist. More than the expectations of becoming the second hero. More than the gazes from his family, heavy with assumption and demand. Ren's mind wandered to the past, reaching back through the layers of training and trial to the very core of his being. When he was born, he was the talented monster, the child who could shatter stone before he could properly speak, who fought with an instinct that terrified his teachers. But more than that, more than the accolades and the whispers of prodigy that followed him like shadows, he had wanted to hone his fist. Not because it was expected, not because it was his birthright, but because something in him recognized it as truth, his truth, unvarnished and absolute. To surpass everyone. To reach even the gods watching above. To stand alone at the summit, not as Renkagu, heir to the first hero, but as himself, defined by his strength and nothing else. That is my true desire, Ren thought, the realization crystallizing in his mind like frost on glass. And in that moment of clarity, he discarded everything. The rivalry he felt with Lucifer and Arthur, gone, like ash in the wind. The inferiority complex that had eaten at him since arriving at Mythos, dissolved, meaningless. The admiration he secretly harbored for those who advanced beyond him, vanished, irrelevant. All that was left? He looked at his right fist, still held aloft despite the agony, despite the trembling, despite everything. That was all that was left. A simple truth, distilled to its essence. His fist. His path. His strength. Not the fist of the second hero. Not the fist that would live up to a legacy. Just his fist. Ren's fist. In the clearing of his mind, in the vacuum left by discarding all those tangled emotions and expectations, something new began to form. Not an intention shaped by others, but a pure, singular focus, a truth so fundamental it transcended technique or talent. Fist intent. The understanding that the fist was not just a weapon but an extension of will, not just a tool but a manifestation of identity. The fist did not serve Ren, it was Ren, distilled to its most essential form. He puked blood in front of him as a rush of mana filled his body, not flowing into his circuits but becoming them, reshaping them according to this new understanding. It wasn't just power, it was clarity, purpose given form, desire made manifest. Strength he didn't have was now found in abundance, pouring into him not from some external source but from within, from the deepest parts of himself that had always known this truth but had been clouded by expectations and comparisons. Second stage of the integration process was completed for him, not through gradual accumulation of power but through the sudden, violent stripping away of everything that wasn't essential. As he rose to his feet, blood dripping from his lips, his fist began to glow, not with the white light of Lucifer's divine blessing, but with something darker, more primal. The violet light of ambition distilled to its purest form, of will unshackled from expectation. The miasmic bear, sensing a new threat, turned its attention back to Ren, red eyes narrowing with malicious intelligence. Lucifer paused in his assault, sensing the change, the shift in the very air around his fellow student. Ren smiled, a hard, tight expression that held no joy, only certainty. This was his path. Not heroism, not legacy, not the approval of others. Just the fist. His fist. And it was enough. Chapter 306, Prelude to Inter Academy Festival, 1. It was official. Another medal. The Star of Valor, no less, pinned proudly to the breast of the boy who'd apparently made a habit of surviving hopeless encounters and walking away with decorations instead of common-sense trauma. The highest civilian honor in the entire Western continent. Which meant, by my count, I was now 2 for 2, since I'd already been told I'd be getting the medal for merit from the Slatemark Empire. I exhaled, running a finger along the cool metal edge of the medallion. I muttered aloud to no one in particular, the sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh of existential confusion. It was all getting a bit silly now. The Star of Valor, normally reserved for soldiers who threw themselves on grenades or civilians who stopped catastrophes, awarded to a student who'd essentially gotten into a supernatural Mexican standoff with an apocalyptic orc pope. Not exactly what the founders of the award had in mind, I'd wager. Not that I was going to complain. I wasn't nearly that noble. Free rewards were still free rewards, and if the world insisted on handing me shiny symbols of national appreciation, I wasn't going to be the idiot who turned them down on principle. The look on Headmaster Eva's face when I'd received it had been nearly worth the near-death experience, a complex cocktail of pride, irritation, and the resigned acceptance of someone watching their insurance premium skyrocket in real time. But medals weren't the only thing looming. It was now November. Which meant only one thing, the Inter Academy Festival was coming. A childish name, all things considered. Something between a sports day and a martial arts world war, wrapped in banners and broadcasted in high def across half the planet. Students from every prestigious magical academy gathering to measure themselves against each other in combat, magic, and various specialized disciplines. Career-making performances, international recruiters, and more corporate sponsorship than a race car with an identity crisis. And still, my heart was thudding in my chest like a war drum. I wanted to win. Not because the world needed saving. Not for the sake of peace or duty or the pursuit of truth. I just wanted to be the strongest. The most powerful. The one who stood above everyone else and looked down at the field like a chess player holding the final piece. There was something pure about it, this desire stripped of noble motivation or grand purpose. Just raw ambition, naked and honest. The kind that would have been called unhealthy in my previous life, but here, in this world, it was practically expected. The bare minimum for someone in Class A. But ambition, as always, was a ladder full of missing rungs. I walked into Class 2A, my mind still chewing on plans and possibilities, only for my senses to prickle the moment the door slid shut behind me. A pulse of something, like static across the soul. My fingers itched. My lips twitched. The ambient mana in the room felt different, charged with competing auras that brushed against my awareness like sandpaper. Lucifer. He looked at me from his seat with those unnatural, verdant eyes of his, a slow, knowing smile curling on his lips. The air around him felt sharp, like a blade honed so finely it cut the wind. Not just controlled mana, but something more fundamental, a concept made manifest. Sword intent. The idiot actually pulled it off. Without even stepping fully into low integration rank, the Golden Boy had reached a domain most people only dreamed of after decades of work and 3 near-death experiences. His smile wasn't arrogant, exactly. It was something worse, confident. The quiet self-assurance of someone who knows exactly where they stand in the hierarchy of power and is perfectly comfortable with their position. The smile of a predator who doesn't need to roar. And then there was Ren. He was quieter now. Less of a storm and more of a simmer. The usual disdain and competitive snark were gone, replaced by something deeper. Something more dangerous. Resolve. His fists sat calmly on the desk. But there was a pressure to them, a tension in his frame, like coiled steel beneath the surface. Fist intent. Another one. Just like Lucifer, he'd reached the level of intent before integration. And, judging by the subtle shift in his gaze, the god's eyes were changing, too, sharper, more focused, as if he were seeing through things rather than merely looking at them. There was no arrogance in his expression anymore. Just a quiet fire that hadn't been there before. A hunger to climb. To catch up. And maybe, to beat us both. He met my gaze for a brief moment, his violet eyes acknowledging without speaking. Not respect, exactly, but recognition. We were pieces on the same board now. I sat in my seat, eyes half-lidded, thoughts spinning. Ren had changed. In the novel, he was always Lucifer's rival, up until Lucifer unlocked his second gift and shot ahead like a rocket with no fuel limit, leaving everyone else in the dust. After that, Ren had grown bitter, his rivalry poisoned by the knowledge that the gap between them was unbridgeable. But things were different now. Ren had seen what Lucifer and I were becoming, and instead of giving up, he'd doubled down. Something inside him had caught flame. And that made things infinitely more interesting. Because this wasn't just about one protagonist anymore. This was a battlefield. And I could feel the war for the top finally beginning. The classroom door slid open with a pneumatic hiss after I settled into my seat. Instructor Nero entered, his usual expressionless face somehow conveying disapproval without changing a single muscle. He carried a tablet under one arm, likely containing detailed assessments of our third mission performances. The room fell silent immediately. For all his lack of outward emotion, Nero commanded respect through sheer presence. Even Cecilia, who typically treated authority figures with casual disdain, straightened slightly in her seat. Class, Nero began, setting the tablets on his desk with a precise movement. I've completed my evaluation of your third mission performances. As expected, most of you met or exceeded the basic requirements. His gray eyes swept across the room, pausing momentarily on me. Some of you, however, seemed determined to turn simple assignments into international incidents. A few students chuckled nervously. I maintained my neutral expression, though I could feel Rose's amused glance from the seat behind me. I will distribute your individual assessments shortly. Before that, I should note that the Western Front Mission Group's evaluation had to be adjusted due to unexpected circumstances. Again, his gaze flickered to me. While the mission was cut short, the data gathered and the actions taken during the confrontation with the Savage Communion had been thoroughly analyzed. He began distributing the tablets, his movements efficient and precise. Each student received their evaluation with varying degrees of anticipation or nonchalance. As a reminder, Nero continued, these assessments will factor into your overall ranking for the Inter-Academy Festival selection process. Those with exceptional evaluations will be given priority consideration for the more prestigious events. When my tablet reached me, I activated it with a touch. The screen illuminated with detailed metrics: combat readiness, tactical awareness, adaptability, team coordination, and more. At the bottom, in bold letters, A+. Rachel leaned over, her hair brushing my shoulder as she peered at my screen. A+? After what you pulled? The Academy's standards must be slipping. I glanced at her tablet. Also A+. Or perhaps they're rewarding creative problem solving, I replied. Nero cleared his throat, drawing our attention back to the front. For transparency, I will announce the overall grades. From the Western Front group, Arthur Nightingale, Rachel Creighton, Rose Springshaper, and Clana Alaric, all A+. Clana raised her head from her desk where she'd been napping, looking momentarily disoriented before processing the information. Oh. Nice, she mumbled, before her head dropped back down. From the Northern Front, Lucifer Windward and Renkagu, A+. Cecilia Slatemark, A. Lucifer nodded, as if merely confirming what he already knew. Ren's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened slightly on the edge of his desk. From the Southern Front, Ian Vizirian, Jean Ashbluff, Serafina Zenith, A. Ian grinned, apparently pleased with his assessment, while Cecilia examined her nails with practiced indifference and Serafina just looked blankly without a care in the world. These grades reflect not just your individual performances, but your contributions to your teams and your adaptability in the field, Nero explained. Those who received A+ demonstrated exceptional skill or judgment under pressure. His eyes found mine again, and this time there was a flicker of something almost like amusement. Or, in some cases, a unique talent for turning potential disasters into diplomatic victories. He closed his tablet with a snap. Now, with the third mission evaluations complete, we turn our attention to the Inter-Academy Festival. Chapter 307, Prelude to Inter-Academy Festival, 2. Now, we have many events for the preliminary events, Nero said, his voice cutting through the classroom chatter with effortless authority. He stood at the front, posture rigid as always, but there was something different in his eyes today, a spark of what might have been excitement in a normal person, or at least mild interest in his case. After the preliminary events, the top 20 ranked students will enter the final event. The Crown Challenge. He paused, letting the name hang in the air. Several students shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. This event will be explained later, don't worry about it now. Before that, you have to participate in 2 events from the choices I will give you. He clicked on his tablet, the subtle movement of his finger triggering the Academy's advanced projection system. A holographic display materialized in front of us, shimmering with light that organized itself into categories and descriptions. The quality was impeccable, no flickering, no distortion, just clean magical engineering at its finest. These are the available events, all team-based, Nero explained, gesturing to the display with a precise sweep of his hand. Choose any 2 you wish. Your performance in these events will determine your ranking going into the Crown Challenge. Choose wisely, not just events you think you can excel in, but ones that will showcase your abilities to the international audience. The classroom hummed with whispers as students leaned forward to examine the options. I barely needed to look. The novel had detailed most of these events extensively, and I'd been planning my strategy for weeks. Nero expanded the first listing with a flick of his fingers. First option, Mana Fortress Defense. Teams of 4 will construct and defend magical fortresses while simultaneously attacking opponent structures. The Academy has developed specialized construction runes that will allow for impressive architectural manifestations without permanent damage to the grounds. The hologram shifted to show a miniature fortress with glowing walls and defensive arrays. Several students made appreciative noises. Second, Dimensional Labyrinth. Teams navigate through a multidimensional maze where spaces fold and shift. You'll face combat, puzzles, and environmental hazards that will test your adaptability under pressure. The projection transformed into a twisting corridor that seemed to bend back on itself impossibly, sections of it fading in and out of view. Third, elemental conquest. Teams compete to control elemental nodes scattered across a constructed landscape. Each captured node enhances your elemental affinity while weakening opponents. The hologram displayed floating orbs of different colors, red for fire, blue for water, brown for earth, and white for air, with mana streams connecting them. Fourth, tactical siege. One team defends while another attacks, then roles reverse. Points awarded for both successful defense and efficient offense. The display showed a fortress with defending teams on the battlements and attacking forces approaching with siege equipment. Fifth, Phantom Fleet Command. Naval warfare using mana constructs on the Academy Lake. Teams navigate and battle on conjured ships that respond to your mana manipulation. The hologram displayed sleek vessels on churning waves, magical cannons firing bursts of colored light. Sixth, Ascension Tower Challenge. Teams race to climb a tower with shifting architecture and increasing difficulty. Each level presents new challenges requiring different skill combinations. The projection showed a spiraling tower with sections that rotated and rearranged themselves, studded with traps and guardian constructs. Seventh, Boundary Breach. Alternating between defense and infiltration of warded territories. This tests both your ability to create security systems and to bypass them. The hologram displayed a complex network of overlapping magical barriers surrounding a central artifact. Eighth, Miasma Purification Challenge. Navigate through simulated miasma zones, purifying corrupted areas and retrieving valuable materials. This event particularly tests your resilience and purification abilities. The display showed swirling clouds of purple-black energy with pathways cutting through them. Ninth, Artifact Synthesis Race. Construct functioning magical artifacts within time constraints, then field test them in practical applications. The hologram showed workbenches with glowing materials and tools, surrounded by testing grounds. And 10th, Tactical Simulation. Command mana constructs representing military units in a large-scale battle simulation, competing to achieve strategic objectives. The display showed miniature soldiers, cavalry, and magical units arranged in formation across a battlefield. Rachel leaned over to me, her golden hair falling forward as she whispered, "Which ones are you thinking?" Elemental Conquest looks perfect for my purification abilities. I nodded absently, my eyes already scanning the sign-up sheet appearing on our personal tablets. I had already decided weeks ago. I selected Boundary Breach and Tactical Simulation, tapping my selections before most students had even finished reading the descriptions. I knew from the novel that these two events would not only showcase my strategic thinking and adaptability but would also place me in direct competition with the other high-tier students I needed to measure myself against. I noticed Lucifer making his selections with similar speed and confidence. Our eyes met briefly, and that same knowing smile played across his lips. He knew what I was doing, or thought he did. Ren, meanwhile, studied the options with uncharacteristic intensity, his violet eyes narrowed in concentration. "You have until the end of the day to submit your selections," Nero announced, closing the holographic display with a gesture. His authoritative voice echoed in the suddenly quiet classroom. "Once chosen, you cannot change your events. Team assignments will be finalized by the end of the week. Each event has a limit of 10 students, given on a first-come first-served basis. You are dismissed for now." As soon as Nero stepped out of the classroom, a sudden rush of movement caught my peripheral vision. In what could only be described as a coordinated attack disguised as casual interest, my desk was suddenly surrounded. Rose appeared on my right with elegant precision, Rachel materialized on my left with a bright smile, Cecilia leaned against the front of my desk with calculated nonchalance, and Serafina somehow claimed the space directly behind me, her presence cool and unmistakable. "What are you choosing?" the four of them asked in perfect unison, as if they'd rehearsed it, which, knowing them, they might have. Their gazes, initially fixed on me, rapidly shifted to each other, narrowing with silent territorial warnings. The temperature around my desk seemed to drop several degrees despite Rachel's natural warmth. I leaned back in my chair, pretending not to notice the silent warfare happening over my head. Boundary breach and tactical simulation, I replied calmly, watching their reactions with carefully concealed amusement. Boundary breach? Excellent choice, Rose nodded approvingly, her violet eyes calculating something far beyond the simple event selection. The perfect blend of defensive and offensive magic application. I've selected it as well. She adjusted her perfectly straight tie with one hand, a gesture that somehow managed to bring her slightly closer to me while maintaining her composure. How fortunate, Cecilia drawled, her crimson eyes gleaming with sardonic humor. I've also chosen Boundary Breach. What a remarkable coincidence that we've all selected the same event. Her golden hair cascaded over one shoulder as she leaned further onto my desk, claiming more territory with casual dominance. Almost as if someone suggested it would be advantageous to form alliances early. Rachel frowned, her sapphire eyes darkening slightly. I've chosen Elemental Conquest and Miasma Purification, she said, tucking a strand of golden hair behind her ear. My purification abilities will be essential for the Miasma event. She placed a hand on my arm, the touch gentle but deliberate. But I could reconsider my selections if you think we should partner in one of your events, Arthur. I want to make sure you're properly supported. Translation: she doesn't want you spending too much time with us without supervision, Cecilia stage whispered, earning a glare from Rachel that could have purified miasma through sheer intensity. Serafina, still standing behind me, spoke without moving closer. Her voice carried the crisp clarity of mountain air. I've selected tactical simulation, she stated simply. The event allows for optimal application of strategic theory with minimal unnecessary physical contact. Her ice blue eyes swept over the other three girls with clinical detachment. Arthur's presence would be a logical advantage for any team. And here I thought you chose it because you genuinely enjoyed Arthur's company, Rose observed with calm precision. How refreshing to know it's purely tactical. Serafina's expression remained unchanged, though the temperature around us seemed to drop another degree. Enjoyment is irrelevant to optimal performance. I'm sure Arthur appreciates being referred to as optimal performance, Cecilia smirked, earning the half-elf's cool stare. I cleared my throat, finally interrupting what was rapidly becoming a four-way tactical negotiation over my choice of events, and possibly my soul. I've already submitted my choices. Boundary breach and tactical simulation offer the best showcase for my particular skill set. Chapter 308, Prelude to Inter Academy Festival, 3. I exhaled as I finally stopped my sword, finishing the final movement of the Tempest dance technique that I could manage. The practice blade hummed softly as it cut through the air one last time, then fell silent as I held it steady, my breathing controlled despite the exertion. A fine sheen of sweat covered my body, testament to the hours I'd spent in the Academy's private training room, repeating the same sequence until my muscles burned and my mind narrowed to a laser focus. Finally, I had achieved adept realm of mastery in the art with all my hard work. I wasn't a master yet, but adept realm meant I could execute the entire sequence without a single wasted movement, each strike flowing into the next with the inevitability of rainfall becoming rivers. After the third mission, there was nothing much to do other than train and push myself more for the Inter Academy Festival. And finally, it was paying out for me. Weeks of grueling practice, of breaking my body down and building it back stronger, of studying techniques until I dreamed of sword forms and mana circulation patterns. All of it had brought me to this moment, standing on the precipice of a breakthrough that would fundamentally change my capabilities. You're ready, Luna informed me, her voice echoing in my mind with unusual solemnity. No teasing remarks or sarcastic observations, just a simple confirmation of what I already knew to be true. I exhaled as I nodded, feeling the white mana core inside my sternum. The core wasn't just a reservoir of power anymore, it had become a nexus, a foundation upon which I could build something far greater. It was time to complete the final stage of the integration process and reach low integration rank. I set my practice sword aside, moving to the center of the training room. The Academy had spared no expense in these facilities, reinforced walls that could withstand considerable magical discharge, automated healing arrays embedded in the floor, and mana circulation systems that would prevent energy backlash from damaging the wider structure. I needed all of those safety features now. Integration wasn't just another rank up. It represented a fundamental shift in how a mage interacted with mana. Instead of simply drawing power from within and without, integration meant exactly what the name suggested, integrating mana completely into one's body, dissolving the core that had previously served as a container and allowing that power to flow freely through every cell. The benefits were enormous: a 70% boost to mana quality and quantity, significantly enhanced physical capabilities, and the ability to execute techniques with a level of precision previously impossible. The foundation for truly extraordinary power. The risks were just as significant. If done incorrectly, the dissolving core could damage one's mana circuits permanently, or worse, cause a catastrophic energy discharge that would leave nothing but ash where a promising mage once stood. I sat cross-legged on the floor, closing my eyes and steadying my breathing. The preliminary work had already been done over months of careful preparation, strengthening my mana circuits, expanding my core's capacity, and perfecting my control over internal energy flows. Now came the culmination. "Let's do this," I murmured, as much to Luna as to myself. I began drawing mana from the atmosphere around me, pulling it into my body in carefully measured streams. Unlike my previous training, where I had forced mana through my circuits to break and rebuild them stronger, this required absolute precision. Too much pressure and the core would resist dissolution, too little and the process would stall halfway, leaving me in a dangerous limbo. The first tendrils of pain began spreading through my chest as my core responded to the external pressure. Not the sharp, immediate agony of torn circuits, but something deeper and more pervasive, the discomfort of fundamental change. "Focus on the boundaries," Luna advised. "The core isn't meant to be solid. It's an artificial constraint, a training wheel. Reminded of what it truly is." I followed her guidance, concentrating on the edges of my mana core. In my mind's eye, I could see it, a sphere of compressed white energy, pulsating with potential. I imagined those edges softening, becoming permeable, allowing the energy to seep outward into the surrounding tissue. The pain intensified as the process began in earnest. Sweat beaded on my forehead, no longer from physical exertion but from the internal battle being waged inside my body. My muscles tensed involuntarily as waves of mana began to escape the dissolving core, seeking pathways through my system. This was the critical moment, guiding that freed energy not into a chaotic explosion but into a controlled integration with every cell in my body. I visualized a network, a perfect lattice extending from my sternum outward, providing channels for the mana to follow. My breath caught as the first major surge hit, a rush of power that made my fingers tingle and my vision blur even behind closed eyelids. The core was beginning to collapse in earnest now, its carefully maintained structure giving way to something more primal and fluid. "Don't fight it," Luna cautioned as I instinctively tried to contain the rush. "You're not losing control, you're gaining a new kind of control. Let it flow." I forced myself to relax, to accept rather than resist. The mana spread through my torso, down my limbs, up into my head, not in a wild torrent but in steady, powerful currents that seemed to illuminate every nerve ending as they passed. The sensation was indescribable, like being filled with liquid light that somehow weighed nothing yet contained immense potential. I could feel my awareness of my own body expanding, becoming more detailed, more precise. Each muscle fiber, each bone, each drop of blood suddenly felt accessible to my consciousness in a way they never had before. A sound escaped my throat, not quite a groan, not quite a gasp, as the final structure of the core gave way. The remaining concentrated mana rushed outward in all directions at once, a controlled explosion contained entirely within my skin. For one terrifying, exhilarating moment, I felt like I might come apart at the seams, my physical form insufficient to contain the energy surging through it. Then, just as suddenly, equilibrium returned. The mana settled, no longer a separate entity within me but a part of me, as integral to my existence as blood or bone. I opened my eyes, blinking at the mundane reality of the training room. Nothing had visibly changed, and yet everything felt different. The quality of light, the texture of the air, the weight of my own body, all perceived with a clarity that bordered on overwhelming. I raised my hand, watching as mana responded to my thought, flowing to my fingertips without the delay or resistance I had grown accustomed to. Not just faster, fundamentally different. The energy wasn't being channeled from a reservoir, it was already there, present in every part of me, waiting only for direction. Low integration rank. I had done it. A smile spread across my face as I rose to my feet, marveling at the sensation. My muscles felt more responsive, my movements more precise. I picked up my practice sword again, executing a simple cut that somehow felt both effortless and more powerful than before. This, I said aloud, is going to change everything. Don't get cocky, Luna replied, though I could hear the approval in her mental voice. Low integration is just the beginning. You've opened the door, now you have to walk through it. She was right, of course. The real work was just beginning. Learning to properly utilize this new state of being, to maximize the advantages it offered while avoiding the pitfalls that came with increased power. And beyond that, progressing to mid and high integration rank, each step bringing me closer to the level I would need to face Vorgoth. But for now, standing in the quiet training room with power flowing through me like never before, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. A milestone reached. A threshold crossed. I was on my way. Chapter 309, Inter Academy Festival, 1. The Inter Academy Festival revealed just how vast and intricate our world truly was. 5 continents, home to over 10 billion people, each one like its own universe, filled with geniuses and prodigies who vied for dominance. From the icy fortresses of the northern schools to the jungle academies of the southern territories, each region cultivated its own approach to magical mastery. Among them, only the few who reached the pinnacle became radiant rankers, their power standing as a testament to their exceptional skill and dedication, their names whispered with reverence across continents. Now, all those forces, from every corner of the world, were converging here, bringing together what many believed to be the most talented generation ever born. It wasn't just a stroke of fate, it seemed almost as if the year 2031 had gifted the world with an extraordinary abundance of talent, as though the universe itself had decided to raise the stakes of human potential. From what I could observe, excluding the students of Mythos Academy, there were 9 others who had reached a similar level of strength as the members of Class 2A. 9 individuals whose auras carried the unmistakable weight of exceptional ability, whose presence in a room shifted the very atmosphere. I catalogued them mentally, noting their academies, their apparent specialties, any subtle tell that might reveal their true capabilities. Knowledge was power, after all, especially when facing unknown quantities. The commencement ceremony for the Inter Academy Festival was about to begin. All 600 students participating in the lower years Inter Academy Festival gathered in one venue, the Grand Amphitheater, an architectural marvel that combined ancient design with modern magical enhancements. Designed to amplify not just sound but presence, it allowed even those seated in the furthest rows to feel as though they were mere feet from the central stage. The curved walls were adorned with the banners of every participating academy, a riot of colors and symbols that represented centuries of tradition and rivalry. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, a palpable energy that crackled like static before a storm. Language barriers dissolved in the universal dialect of ambition as students sized each other up with sideways glances and whispered assessments. But as the crowd quieted down, all eyes turned toward the podium. Valerie von Lampez, the vice headmaster of Mythos Academy, stepped forward. Her presence commanded attention, but unlike most who sought to dominate the room, her power lay in her calm, collected demeanor. She wasn't here to inspire, she was here to lay out the reality. She began, her voice amplified but measured. You're not here to compete for glory. That will come, or it won't. You're not here to prove yourselves to others either. By now, you should know that true strength has little to do with public acclaim. She paused, her eyes scanning the sea of faces, assessing us as much as we were assessing her. The silver in her hair caught the light, a testament to decades of experience that none of us could claim. You've trained, fought, bled, and clawed your way to this point. You already know where you stand. This festival is not just a battle to showcase your talents but to understand the limits of your growth. If you want to rise beyond the ordinary, you'll need more than raw strength. You'll need purpose. You'll need to understand what drives you, because without that, no amount of skill will carry you far. The crowd remained silent, absorbing her words. There was no cheerleading here, no empty praise. Just cold, hard truth delivered with the precision of a surgeon's knife. I noticed a few students shifting uncomfortably, perhaps confronting for the first time the hollow nature of their motivations. I've seen too many talents wither because they couldn't find what lay beyond their gifts. This festival will test you in ways that have little to do with combat. Think about that as you fight, and you may find yourself at the top. With those final words hanging in the air, Valerie stepped back, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. It wasn't the kind of speech designed to spark excitement, but rather one meant to settle deep within us, to challenge us to think beyond the surface of competition. The crowd remained still, processing the gravity of her message. Then Professor Nero took the stage, his demeanor much more practical, ready to explain the logistics of the festival. His immaculate uniform and sharp, calculated movements provided a stark contrast to Valerie's philosophical approach. His voice carried clearly across the gathering, calm and focused. The first day of the festival, Nero began, will be purely celebratory. Today is for you to enjoy, to meet your peers, and immerse yourself in the spirit of this event. There will be no competitions until tomorrow. A collective exhale rippled through the audience. One day of respite before the storm. The competition portion will span 5 days, Nero continued, activating a hovering magical display that materialized behind him. A complex schedule appeared, color-coded and precise. Each day will host 2 events, one in the morning and one in the evening. This structure allows for adequate recovery time between performances and proper preparation. He gestured to the first line of the schedule. Day 2 will begin with the Mana Fortress defense at 9 a.m., followed by Dimensional Labyrinth at 5 p.m. The display shifted, highlighting the next day's events. Day 3 will feature Elemental Conquest in the morning and Tactical Siege in the evening. Another shift. Day 4 continues with Phantom Fleet Command and Ascension Tower Challenge. The pattern was clear now, methodical and relentless. Day 5 brings Boundary Breach and Miasma Purification Challenge. I noted the positioning of my chosen events, Boundary Breach fairly late in the schedule, giving me time to observe other competitors and refine my strategies. The final competition day, Day 6, will conclude with Artifact Synthesis Race and Tactical Simulation. Following the completion of all 10 team events, rankings will be calculated based on individual and team performance metrics. Nero paused, allowing the information to settle before delivering the most important detail. The top 20 ranked individuals will then advance to the Crown Challenge, which will take place on the 7th and final day of the festival. This event will be explained in detail only to those who qualify. Murmurs rippled through the crowd at this deliberate withholding of information. The unknown final challenge added another layer of complexity to our preparations. We recognize that this schedule means some participants will experience longer gaps between their events than others. This is unavoidable given the logistical constraints of hosting 10 major competitions in 5 days. Nero's tone made it clear this was not up for negotiation. Consider any extended wait periods as opportunities for observation and strategic adjustment. He tapped the display again, and it expanded to show venue locations, recovery facilities, and spectator arrangements. Each event will be scored by a panel of judges drawn from all participating academies to ensure fairness. Scoring criteria have been standardized and will be available for review beginning tomorrow morning. Pay particular attention to the section on prohibited techniques and boundary violations. Disqualification will be immediate and non-negotiable. The atmosphere in the amphitheater had shifted from anticipation to focus calculation as students mentally arranged their schedules, plotting recovery times and preparation strategies. I could almost see the gears turning behind hundreds of eyes, each person trying to find the optimal path through the gauntlet that had been laid out. Remember, Nero concluded, his voice taking on a rare edge of emphasis, while this is a competition, it is also a reflection of your academies. Conduct yourselves accordingly. With that final admonition, he stepped back from the podium. The holographic display behind him consolidated into a floating orb that would remain accessible throughout the festival grounds, allowing students to check schedules and locations at any time. As the formal portion of the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, I remained seated for a moment, mentally mapping out the days ahead. Boundary breach on day 5, tactical simulation on day 6, then, if all went according to plan, the crown challenge on day 7. The path was clear. All that remained was execution. Around me, the buzz of conversation grew as students formed groups, some reconnecting with friends from other academies, others engaging in the opening moves of psychological warfare disguised as polite conversation. Chapter 310, Inter-Academy Festival, 2. The formal part of the ceremony was done, everyone had sat still, looked important, and applauded on cue. Now came the real battlefield, the social part. The air was laced with a low hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, and the subtle shuffle of shoes against the polished marble floor. It was the kind of atmosphere where everyone smiled too much and secretly measured each other's power levels like it was a futuristic role-playing game. Which, to be fair, it kind of was. 5 great academies, one from each continent, were represented here in full regalia and full ego. Slate Mark Academy from the central continent, all poised prestige and imperial confidence, their uniforms trimmed in gold that somehow looked both tasteful and obscenely expensive. Starcrest from the east, full of martial pride and mysterious ancient techniques. Ashenhold of the west, looking like they'd walked straight out of a necromancer's gothic daydream, all dark fabrics and silver accents that caught the light like tiny stars. Serpentstone from the south, always sharp and proud, their students adorned with subtle scales and serpentine motifs that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. And Pillin from the north, whose students looked like they'd been surviving blizzards since birth and were wondering what all this warm air was doing in their lungs, their pale faces flushed slightly in the heated room. And then, of course, Mythos Academy. The host, the crown jewel, the big cheese. Us. Are you excited, Arthur? Rachel said as she drifted to my side, her shoulder brushing mine like it was an accident even though we both knew it wasn't. Her golden hair caught the light, creating a halo effect that reinforced her saintess image with almost theatrical precision. You look excited. Her sapphire eyes studied my face with that particular mixture of genuine care and subtle possession that was uniquely Rachel. She adjusted her formal uniform, a bit more elaborate than our daily wear, with silver trim that emphasized her status, and leaned slightly closer, her perfume carrying notes of vanilla and something floral I couldn't quite identify. Excited? Yes. Absolutely. I wasn't here to survive. Not this time. I was here to win. For the fun of it. For the thrill. For that moment where everyone else is watching, and you know you're the one they're watching for. I want to win, I said, smiling at her. Against everyone. I want that moment where everything else fades and it's just victory ringing in your bones. Rachel blinked, like she hadn't expected that level of honesty. Then she tilted her head and gave me one of those radiant saintess smiles that could probably purify minor sins and make flowers bloom out of brick. Well, she said, it's nice. I'll be rooting for you. And, you know, her voice dropped to a whisper, you must win. Her hand found mine briefly, a gentle squeeze that conveyed more than words could. Not just for you. For us. For what we could be. There was something vulnerable in her expression then, a brief glimpse behind the perfect saintess facade to the girl who harbored very human desires and fears. It vanished almost immediately, replaced by her usual warm confidence. Thanks, Ratch, I said, genuinely touched by the momentary transparency. I'll give it everything I have. She leaned in a little more, about to say something else. And that's when the air went sugary sweet. The smell of honey and mild hostility floated in. I turned, and there they were. Cecilia and Serafina, flanking me like twin moons on either side of a rather unfortunate planet. Arthur, Cecilia purred, her crimson eyes gleaming with mischief as she sidled up to my right side. Her golden hair was arranged in an elaborate style that somehow managed to look both effortless and like it had taken hours to perfect. We have boundary breached together, isn't that just perfect? You, me, and a battlefield. She tapped my chest with one perfectly manicured nail. I do so enjoy breaking through your boundaries. Rachel's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I also have tactical simulation with Arthur, Serafina said, her voice calm and cool, like a glacier pretending not to be jealous. The half-elf stood to my left, her silver hair falling like a curtain of moonlight down her back, her posture regal and distant despite her obvious interest in staking her claim. Our tactical compatibility is optimal. Other partnerships would be inefficient by comparison. I'm in that too, Rachel added, not to be outdone, her arms sliding through mine with practiced casualness. Arthur and I have already discussed our strategy, haven't we? We hadn't, but I wasn't about to contradict her in the middle of this increasingly tense four-way standoff. And I've got boundary breach as well, Rose declared as she practically teleported in from the void like a cheerful ninja with auburn hair. She appeared just behind me, her violet eyes sparkling with intelligence and something that might have been amusement at the situation she'd just walked into. I thought we might coordinate our approach, Arthur. My paradox manipulation works quite well with your improvisational style. Within seconds, I was the center of a planetary alignment of dangerous affections. 4 of the strongest young women in the world, standing in a loose square of territorial energy, all subtly eyeing each other like diplomats who knew the war was only on pause. Isn't this cozy? Cecilia observed, her tone dripping with honeyed venom. The 4 of us, all competing for, collaborating with Arthur. She pointedly examined Rachel's grip on my arm. Though some seem to be taking the physical aspect of teamwork quite literally. Physical contact enhances coordination, Serafina stated flatly, though her ice blue eyes narrowed slightly. Though excess is unnecessary. We're all friends here, Rose said diplomatically, though her smile had an edge to it. Besides, Arthur appreciates having options, don't you, Arthur? The loaded question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin half pulled. What Arthur appreciates, I began carefully, is talented teammates who can focus on winning rather than fighting over him like he's the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. Cecilia finished for me, her smile widening. But that's half the fun, darling. Before the gravity of that emotional singularity could collapse into open skirmish, I slipped sideways like a magician doing a coin trick and made a beeline for someone safer. Elara, Naomi. Fancy meeting you here, I called, zeroing in on the 2 girls from Slate Mark Academy I'd first met at the Tower of Magic conference what felt like several lifetimes ago. Behind me, I heard Cecilia's melodic laugh, Rachel's frustrated sigh, Rose's diplomatic, perhaps we should discuss this later, and Serafina's cool, tactical retreat noted. Hey Arthur, Elara said with her signature calm smile, violet eyes twinkling. There was something deeply relaxing about her presence, like a soft-spoken librarian who could also collapse a building with a flick of her hand. Naomi just waved, eyes bright, smile unfiltered. Ah. Peace. Relative peace. In my mind, Luna let out a long, exasperated sigh. Running from your harem straight into more girls. Classic Arthur. What the hell do you mean, classic Arthur? Don't play dumb with me, you lady magnet, she grumbled. At this rate, we'll need a spreadsheet just to keep track of your complicated relationships. I sighed internally. Externally, I kept the smile. I turned my attention fully to Elara, because talking to her was like wrapping your brain in a warm blanket. She had that soft, measured way of speaking that made even terrifying topics like ancient magic theory sound like bedtime stories. How've you been? I asked, keeping my tone casual. She tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, her expression brightening just enough to show it was genuine. Busy. Slate Mark's curriculum is still brutal. But I've been keeping up. I was actually looking forward to seeing Mythos again. You know, without demons trying to destroy things this time. Always a plus, I said with a grin. Glad you came back. You look well. She looked down slightly, not blushing per se, but just softening. You do too. Stronger, somehow. Not just magically. Before I could respond, the air shifted. Not physically, but perceptibly. Like a heat wave you couldn't see, but could feel in your teeth. Jack Blazespout had entered the conversation. He didn't announce himself. He never did. He just appeared, like a very expensive but utterly cursed perfume, slipping into conversations and draining them of sincerity. "Arthur," Jack said, and his voice was dipped in velvet and venom, "you're here. How wonderful." "Elara," he added smoothly, his eyes flicking to her like she was a fine wine he was considering tasting. He leaned slightly in her direction, not quite close enough to be improper, but close enough to be noticed. "Always a pleasure." I didn't smile. "Elara," I said, calmly but clearly, "did you hear? Jack's entering the tactical siege event." "Oh," she said, a little confused. "That's not usually his area." Jack gave a lazy chuckle. "I thought I'd challenge myself. Besides, it wouldn't be fun without a bit of pressure." He looked at me, and there was a glint in his eyes that had nothing to do with the event and everything to do with last time. The memory of our last conversation was still etched in my mind, the provocation, the veiled threats, the smug suggestion that Rose could be taken like a prize off a shelf. "You like pressure?" I said, my voice even. "You'll get plenty of it." Jack's smile widened slightly. "From you?" He turned his gaze back to Elara, and for a second too long, let his eyes linger. "I suppose that's what makes it so thrilling." Elara, to her credit, didn't flinch. But she did shift a half step closer to me. It was subtle. But I noticed. So did Jack. His smile didn't break, but there was a flicker behind his eyes. Irritation, maybe. Or disappointment. Or just calculation. Chapter 311, Inter Academy Festival, 3. Jack's eyes on Elara were the sort of thing that made you wonder if punching a duke's son could be reclassified as community service. I didn't like it. Disgusting, I thought. But I didn't move. Not yet. I just watched him, because the thing about someone who hides behind smiles is that they always forget, their eyes still tell the truth. And right now, Jack's eyes were brimming with that old familiar arrogance. The kind that usually ends up being outlived by a brick wall or karma on a deadline. It wasn't just confidence, it was the absolute certainty of someone who thought the world had been gift-wrapped specifically for them, complete with a bow made of everyone else's compliance. "Well," Jack said, cocking his head like someone performing the idea of civility, "since we don't share any events, I suppose we'll only find out at the finale, won't we?" "We will," I nodded, my tone so even it could have been used to level shelves. "And you, Arthur Nightingale, you're the one to beat," Jack continued, his smile widening just enough to show a hint of teeth. A predator's smile, one that never quite reached his eyes. "Rank one of the most prestigious academy in the world. Ready to give up the crown?" I chuckled. Slowly. Because if you're going to laugh at someone, do it like you're already picturing their defeat. Like you've seen the ending and found it mildly amusing. "Try me." That was when a voice cut through the tension like a well-aimed ice cube down the back of your shirt. "You two seem to be forgetting about me." Lucifer walked over, hands in his pockets, face relaxed but eyes sharp, like a man who could smile while calculating trajectories for 10 different kinds of victory. His windward lineage was evident in the perfect posture that seemed to require absolutely no effort, the kind that made tailors weep with gratitude. "I want the crown too," he said with that perfectly measured windward calm, "and I don't plan on losing." Jack's eyes narrowed as all three of us stood there, a triangle of tension and ambition and an unhealthy amount of testosterone. If someone had taken a photo of us just then, they could have sold it to textbooks as a definition of rivals with unresolved issues. Or perhaps as a visual aid for male ego density reaching critical mass. "Well," Jack sighed, as though we'd just inconvenienced him by breathing the same air, "this got annoying." And with a flick of his coat and one last sideways glance at Elara, because of course he had to do that, he turned and strolled away like a man who thought retreat was a tactical choice. Each step was carefully measured, a performance of dismissal meant for an audience he assumed was always watching. Lucifer looked at me. Different events, he said, holding out his hand. But I want you at the finale. I met his gaze and saw it. That spark in his verdant eyes. Not pride. Not mockery. Respect. He wanted a fair fight. A real one. Me at my best. For once, I wanted the same. I wasn't here to outmaneuver them, to trick them into a win. Not this time. I wanted to beat them with nothing but strength. I'll be there, I said, gripping his hand. Try and keep up. Lucifer nodded once and walked off, coat swaying behind him like he had rehearsed the movement in front of a mirror. Twice. His presence lingered even after he left, like expensive cologne or the memory of a perfect musical note. Wow, Elara said, her voice light but not without a touch of amusement, to think you'd have such fearsome rivals. Lucifer Windward and Jack Blaze Spout. The slight pause before Jack's name spoke volumes, a library of disdain compressed into a quarter-second of hesitation. Are you close with him? I asked. She scratched her cheek like she was trying to erase the memory. A delicate gesture that somehow conveyed years of accumulated irritation. Not really. We used to see each other a lot when we were younger. He's a duke's son, I'm an archduke's daughter. You know how those things go. Endless balls, garden parties, and formal dinners where children are expected to behave like miniature adults while the real adults behave like overgrown children. Her lips quirked into a rueful smile. But we never really clicked. He was always focused on something other than actually having a conversation. Always looking over your shoulder for someone more important to talk to. And, well, he doesn't really have friends. Not real ones, anyway. I pointed, somewhat obviously, toward the small crowd orbiting Jack like moons around a particularly smug planet. A solar system where every celestial body existed solely to reflect his light. Doesn't look like someone who lacks friends. Elara tilted her head, smiling faintly. Those aren't friends. Those are admirers. Collectors of proximity. Jack doesn't collect people, he acquires them. Like trophies or rare coins. And most don't notice until it's far too late. She studied the group with the clinical detachment of a biologist observing an unusual species. By then, they're either dependent on his approval or too invested to walk away. She didn't say it with spite. More like someone commenting on the weather, a bit grim, mildly unpredictable, but not unexpected. I glanced toward the cluster again, my eyes catching on a tall figure standing just behind Jack. Tobias. Son of a marquis. A white ranker with a talent that could hold its own against anyone in Class 2A. Not flashy, but dependable. The kind of person who could tear down a wall while others argued about the door. And there he is, I thought, a gifted genius playing second fiddle to a monster with a smile. Elara was also white rank, but unlike Tobias, she was a pure support mage. Her buffs and barriers were strong enough to compare with Rachel's, perhaps even surpass them in certain circumstances. Her shields could withstand artillery strikes, and her enhancement spells could make even a novice fighter move like a master. Her attack spells, however, wouldn't exactly be breaking headlines. Not unless someone counted mildly inconvenient light show as an attack. Anyway, Elara said, brushing some hair behind her ear, it's been nice talking to you. You're more easygoing than Jack. Though that's not really saying much. Thanks, I smiled. And I meant it. Being around Elara was like slipping into a warm bath, comforting, steady, and unlikely to try and stab you during dinner. She reminded me of Rachel back when things were simpler, before the affection turned into obsession, and the obsession started threatening to write me into a romantic psychological thriller with a questionable third act. Then, just as I was about to say something further, I felt a soft weight on my back. A very familiar one. Ratch? I asked, glancing over my shoulder. Rachel was latched onto me like a saintess-shaped backpack, her arms tight around my torso and her golden hair spilling over my shoulder like a waterfall of spun sunshine. Her grip had the determined strength of someone who had spent considerable time thinking about optimal clinging techniques. "No more," she mumbled, her voice muffled into my spine, like I was a particularly chatty pillow. Elara blinked, caught somewhere between confusion and polite concern. The expression of someone watching an unexpected plot twist in what they thought was a straightforward conversation. And then, from my left, because fate enjoys comedic timing and has a particular fondness for the rule of three, I felt the faintest tickle of honey-scented perfume and a voice like cool silk whisper against my ear. "I believe what she means," Serafina said, "is stop seducing." I turned, only to find her trying to pry Rachel off me with the sort of refined effort that somehow still looked like a diplomatic performance. No raised voices. No hair pulling. Just the gentle insistence of a quiet war waged with poise. Centuries of royal breeding had apparently perfected the art of conflict resolution that looked, to outside observers, like a cordial ballet. I don't know how princesses do this, I thought. Even when they were fighting over you, they managed to make it look like a royal waltz. A choreographed disagreement where every movement was precise, every word calibrated, and the daggers remained firmly metaphorical and ornately decorated. I stood there, caught between one girl hugging me like a life-size teddy bear, another attempting a noble intervention with the grace of someone disarming a bomb while wearing formal evening wear. And Elara watching the whole scene like someone who just accidentally tuned into a reality show on fast forward. The festival grounds stretched around us, buzzing with students from academies across the continent. Banners fluttered, enchanted lanterns hovered, and approximately 76 different varieties of street food perfumed the air with competing aromas. Somewhere, a brass band was enthusiastically murdering what might have once been classical music before it met their particular interpretation. And here we were, creating our own little drama in the middle of it all. Welcome to the Inter Academy Festival. Apparently, my fanbase had a dress code. And a remarkably poor sense of timing. Chapter 312, Inter Academy Festival, 4. Rachel and Serafina were still delicately arguing, if one could call a cold war with flowery words and passive-aggressive smiles an argument. Meanwhile, Elara stood quietly beside me, her violet eyes flicking between the Saintess and the Princess of Mount Hua like someone watching two cats hiss at each other on a velvet cushion. Then her gaze met mine, and her mouth formed a soft little "oh," the international symbol for I see what kind of mess this is. She raised her hand to cover her lips in a gesture halfway between amusement and polite alarm. "Well," she said gently, "it seems you're busy, Arthur. I'll go now." She drifted past me like a particularly well-mannered breeze. Finally, Rachel muttered, the words not even pretending to be charitable. "I wondered how long she'd cling to you." "She wasn't clinging, Ratch," I said as diplomatically as possible while staring at the Saintess who was now pouting like she'd just been told Christmas was cancelled. "Too much," Serafina murmured, folding her arms in judgment. Both girls turned to me, their stares boring into my soul like I was a particularly confusing tax form. And then, like a rom-com missile with lipstick guidance, Cecilia arrived. "Arthur," she cooed, weaving her arms around my right arm like it was her personal property, and also possibly her emotional support limb. "I missed you." "Behave yourself," Rachel snapped, eyes narrowing. Rachel and Cecilia locked eyes, the air between them practically crackling with passive-aggressive divinity. Then Serafina, subtle as a snowfall, slid her hand into the mix. She took my other arm and gently tugged, pulling me slightly toward her with a grace so serene it was suspicious. "Arthur," she leaned in, her breath brushing my ear like she was auditioning for the role of temptation incarnate. Her voice was soft, warm and dangerously sweet, like sugar laced with moonlight. "We have tactical simulation together," she murmured, her fingers lacing with mine. "Delicate. Elegant. Impossibly sure." "We do?" I nodded, mostly because my brain had short-circuited somewhere between Arthur and ear whispering. Her lips curled up, not a smirk nor a grin, but something far more lethal, a quiet, self-assured smile. "I want you all to myself." My lungs decided now was a good time to forget how to function. Her scent, cool, like snow and silver tea, wrapped around me as I tried to remember what oxygen was for. Then, from beyond the swarm of beauty and spiritual intimidation, a hand reached out with something small and blessedly normal. "Arthur, have this," Rose said. "A cup. Liquid. Sanity." I took it gratefully and drank. "What is it?" Rachel asked, blinking as her attention finally slid off Cecilia's face like a cat realizing the laser pointer had vanished. "Apple cider," I replied. "Thanks, Rose." She just smiled. At least one of them was content with saving my life instead of claiming it. Across the hall, my eyes snagged on someone, sharper than most things ought to be. Like a nail sticking out of a polished floorboard, except this nail could cut through solid myth. A group of students stood at ease, wrapped in the prestigious colors of Starcrest Academy. They had that casual elegance only people raised on cultivation manuals and family legacies could possess. But even in that lot, 3 figures stood apart, like punctuation marks in an otherwise average sentence. The first was Arya Gu, firechild of the Gu family, whose flames were apparently passed down like family heirlooms and stomach ulcers. Her aura flickered around her, warm and impatient, the kind of person who probably thought, "Let's burn it down," was a reasonable opening argument in a debate. Next to her was Ava Peng, fists clenched loosely, as though even gravity wasn't entirely sure it wanted to challenge her. The Peng family were second only to the Kagov family in unarmed combat, and Ava looked like she could shatter a wall or a philosophical argument with equal ease. And then there was Seola Moyong. She didn't stand out. She pressed in. Her presence wasn't loud or showy. It was heavy, like standing too close to the edge of a mountain cliff and realizing the wind's gone quiet. Her hair spilled like ink down her back, smooth and deliberate. Her golden eyes shimmered, not like stars, but like coins dropped into a wishing well, deep, bright, and far too ancient for comfort. The Moyong family's sword arts were legendary, and Seola was their prodigy. No, prodigy implied she might one day be great. She already was. The world had her marked as future number 2 after Jack was revealed to be the third calamity, a statement so ludicrously specific it carried the weight of prophecy. Because number 1? That was Lucifer Windward. Of course. Readers of Saga of the Divine Swordsman had dubbed her the female Lucifer for a reason. She was cold steel in a room full of glowing embers. Fair, unfair, it didn't matter. She was going to carve her way through the ranks with a smile on her face and a sword in her hand. And I might have been staring. "You're looking at another girl," Cecilia's voice chimed sweetly beside me, like a songbird holding a kitchen knife. I blinked. Rachel was on my other side, smiling. Smiling. Except her eyes weren't smiling. They were studying me the way an assassin studies the fastest route to the spine. "I was just observing talent," I said quickly, adjusting my collar like it might shield me from divine retribution. Rachel's smile deepened in the way that implied several spiritual wars had been declared simultaneously. "Yes. I may have, once again, professionally and catastrophically messed up. Underscore 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 underscore. The air in the headmaster's office was unusually still, which was remarkable given that the room had just tried to rip itself into a dozen glittering dimensions under Eva's will. Now, all of that was gone, like a storm that had politely cleaned up after itself. "I'm surprised to see you ask for an invitation so shamelessly," Eva said, her voice smooth as ice and twice as cold. Her navy blue hair was pinned in an immaculate coil, every strand declaring war against disorder. Her violet eyes, however, were anything but composed. They gleamed like stars about to go supernova. Across from her, hands in his pockets, stood Magnus Drakkar, the Martial King himself. Looking like he'd just wandered in from a stroll and hadn't noticed the magical apocalypse that had tried to occur around him. "How long has it been again?" Eva asked, tone arid enough to parch a desert. 11 years, I believe, Magnus replied with a smile that could outshine a smug sun. "You were the first one who lost to me, after all." "I was," Eva said, her voice flatter than a politician's promise. Then her eyes narrowed, and the temperature of the room plummeted. "But really, what brings the Martial King to my office? Seeking nostalgia? Or just checking if your legacy still matters?" There was a sound, no, a sensation, like reality holding its breath. Then space fractured, quietly. Light spilled out of nowhere and everywhere at once. Lances of pure light, thousands of them, hovered mid-air, poised like they were waiting for someone to flinch. They didn't buzz or hum. That would have been too dramatic. They simply existed, impossibly precise, as if the universe had decided that this man needed to be politely annihilated. Magnus didn't blink. Didn't budge. He just stood there, arms still lazily at his sides, as though surrounded by death was his usual Thursday afternoon. "You always were a bit theatrical," he said mildly. "Still, as expected from the world's strongest light mage. You are formidable." Eva didn't answer. Her eyes were still calculating angles. "But," Magnus added with a tilt of his head, "you haven't improved." The words were casual. Almost kind. Like telling someone their shoelace was untied, except in this case, the shoelace was her entire career. Eva's brow twitched. "You think that just because I couldn't beat you back then," she said slowly, "and you've gotten stronger while I haven't," Magnus interrupted gently. "Not really. Not in the way that matters." Eva exhaled sharply, and with it, the light dissolved. The pure light lances vanished, as though they had simply changed their minds about existence. "I just needed to vent," she muttered. "I do recommend yoga," Magnus offered. "Or a punching bag. Maybe a moon to kick." Eva rolled her eyes. Magnus took a few leisurely steps forward, his expression softening. "But no, I'm not here to flex. I'm here to observe." "Observe what?" "The future," he said. "I've watched enough battles on screens, read enough reports written by the dull. This time, I want to see them with my own eyes. The talent. The ones who'll stand at the summit when we're gone." Eva gave him a long look, as if weighing whether he meant it or just liked the sound of his own voice. Then, finally, she sat back in her chair and waved one hand dismissively. "Fine. Stay. Just don't break anyone." "No promises," Magnus smiled. "But I'll try to be civil." "That would be new," Eva muttered, already regretting everything. Chapter 313, Mana Fortress Defense, 1. The first event in the Inter Academy Festival was the Mana Fortress Defense. This event required the 60 participating students to deal with coordinated attacks from beasts captured by the Academy for the event. The setting was spectacular, a massive arena transformed into a battlefield with 10 separate fortresses, each allocated to a team of 6 students from mixed academies. The fortresses weren't mere physical structures but advanced constructs that responded to their defenders' actions, growing stronger or weaker based on how well the team functioned together. The design of each fortress reflected cutting-edge technological achievements, holographic reinforcement matrices overlaid on physical architecture, automated defense systems with advanced targeting algorithms, and central power cores that synchronized with the defenders' abilities. The arena itself was equipped with environmental monitoring systems and damage control protocols that could assess performance in real time. The rules were simple yet demanding. Defend your fortress against waves of increasingly powerful mana beasts while maintaining your team's cohesion. Points were awarded for successful defense, tactical ingenuity, and efficient beast suppression. Each fortress contained a central power core that, if properly synchronized with, would enhance the team's abilities, but only if all 6 members contributed harmoniously. Spectators filled the stands surrounding the arena, their excited chatter creating a constant background hum. Academy officials and talent scouts from military organizations occupied premium viewing boxes, their attentive gazes missing nothing. This wasn't just a competition, it was a recruitment ground for the next generation of elite fighters. Vice Headmaster Valerie took the center stage, her dark hair gleaming under the morning sun. She raised a hand, and the crowd gradually fell silent. Competitors, her voice resonated across the field, your first challenge begins now. With a gesture of her hand, the ground trembled. Energy barriers sprung up around each fortress as massive gates opened in the arena walls. The beasts had arrived. Fortress 3 stood as a gleaming citadel of blue-white stone, its architecture reminiscent of northern design with sweeping spires and reinforced battlements. Upon its highest tower stood Lucifer windward, his blonde hair catching the morning light as he surveyed the approaching threats. The Prince of the North cut an impressive figure against the skyline, tall, composed, his white academy uniform immaculate despite the wind that whipped around the tower's peak. His eyes narrowed as he focused on the emerging beasts. The god's eyes gift activated subtly, his vision sharpening until he could discern individual hairs on creatures still hundreds of yards away. He raised 2 fingers and swept them right to left, signaling to his teammates below. On the eastern battlement, Gene Ashbluff acknowledged the signal with a slight tilt of his head. The dark-haired necromancer stood with unnatural stillness, his pale skin contrasting sharply with his black uniform. Twin short swords remained sheathed at his hips as his hands moved through subtle gestures, preparing for the coming conflict. "They're testing our formation," Gene remarked quietly to himself, analyzing the beast's movement patterns. "Predictable." He turned slightly, catching the eye of their other primary combatant. A slight nod conveyed his thoughts, save strength for later waves. On the western wall, Ava Peng received his message with a short nod of acknowledgement. The white-rank martial artist rolled her shoulders, loosening muscles that were already primed for combat. "Right flank's mine," she called out, voice crisp and confident. "Let them come." The remaining 3 team members, a water spear user from Serpent Stone, a wind specialist from Starcrest, and a support mage from Slatemark, positioned themselves according to Lucifer's hand signals. They understood the hierarchy instantly. The 3 white rank and integration rank fighters would lead, while they would provide specialized support. The first wave emerged fully from the gates now, dozens of 4-star crystal wolves whose fur refracted light like living prisms. Their eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence as they assessed the fortress, splitting into coordinated hunting packs. Above them, 3 winged serpents with scales that shifted color to match the sky circled in precise patterns. The fortress's automatic defenses activated with a low hum. Advanced targeting systems locked onto approaching threats before releasing concentrated bolts of energy. The first volley struck with impressive precision, felling 3 wolves and forcing a serpent to execute a sharp evasive maneuver. But the beasts adapted quickly, their movements becoming more erratic, deliberately avoiding the predictable targeting patterns. Gene watched as the wolf pack split into 3 coordinated groups. "They're learning fast," he observed to the barrier specialist beside him. "Adapting to our defensive patterns already." From the tower, Lucifer made a cutting motion with his hand. The prince's expression remained calm as he assessed the situation. The wolves were approaching from 3 directions, clearly intending to split their defensive focus while the aerial units prepared for opportunistic strikes. The time for observation had ended. Lucifer extended his hand, and white mana coalesced around his fingers before flowing outward to form his sword, not drawn from a scabbard but manifested directly from his power. The blade gleamed with an inner light as he activated his first gift, Yin-Yang Body. 6 elemental energies began circulating around him, ribbons of fire, ice, water, lightning, wind, and earth, each responding to his will. The first movement of the myth of the Northern Peak art flowed through him as he executed a precise horizontal cut. A crescent wave of freezing energy shot toward the largest wolf pack, the temperature around the blade dropping so rapidly that frost patterns spread across its surface. The ground beneath the charging beasts frosted instantly. The front line of wolves found their crystalline legs frozen to the ground mid-stride, momentum carrying their bodies forward while their limbs remained trapped. Those behind crashed into their immobilized packmates, creating a chaotic tangle of thrashing bodies and lethal crystal fur. Jean, seeing the opening Lucifer had created, drew his twin short swords. The blades served as conduits for his dark mana, leaving trails of deep violet light in the air. The ground before the eastern wall split open, and skeletal hands emerged, clawing upward as animated bones pulled themselves from the depths. "Engage and contain," Jean directed, his voice low but clear. The skeletal warriors charged toward the second wolf pack, bone weapons glinting with the same violet energy that had created them. "These constructs should hold them," he noted to Lucifer through their communication link. "For now." Meanwhile, Ava had taken a different approach to the third group of wolves. She vaulted from the western wall in a perfect arc that would place her directly in their path. When she struck the ground, the impact resonated through the arena floor. A shockwave spread outward, the stone cracking in a perfect circle around her landing point. "Come on then," she challenged, settling into a low, grounded stance. Her muscles tensed as power circulated through specialized pathways, reinforcing her body beyond normal human limits. Her fists began to glow with a deep crimson light. The lead wolf recovered first, lunging at her with crystalline fangs extended. Ava pivoted, her movement precise and fluid. Her fist connected with the beast's skull, the impact producing a sound like a massive bell being struck. Cracks spread across the wolf's head before it collapsed entirely, its body crumpling from the concentrated force. "One down," she muttered, already moving to the next target. Her movements flowed smoothly from one strike to the next, generating rippling aftershocks that damaged multiple opponents simultaneously. Each impact produced that same resonant tone, a deadly rhythm beating through her controlled assault. Above the battlefield, the winged serpents had been circling, waiting for an opening. Seeing the defenders engaged with the ground forces, they tucked their wings and dove toward the fortress's central tower, bodies shifting color to blend with the sky. Lucifer tracked their movement with his god's eyes. "Predictable," he murmured, reading their attack pattern seconds before execution. The wind around him responded to his will, gathering around his blade and compressing until the air itself became a weapon. With 3 precise cuts, each movement economical and refined, he released concentrated air blades that intercepted the serpent's mid-dive. 2 serpents were caught directly, their wings sheared by the concentrated air pressure. Their bodies tumbled from the sky, control lost as they spiraled toward the ground. The third serpent displayed remarkable awareness, twisting its sinuous body at the last possible moment to avoid direct impact. The serpent-stone water elementalist, positioned on the north wall, had been tracking the aerial threat. With a flowing gesture, she drew moisture from the air and compressed it into densely packed water spears that converged on the serpent from multiple angles. "Got you," she said with satisfaction as 3 struck true, piercing its color-shifting scales. Wounded, it retreated toward the arena wall, its attack run abandoned. On the eastern front, Jin's undead forces had engaged the second wolf pack. The skeletal warriors lacked the raw strength to match the crystal wolves, but they possessed other advantages. When claws or fangs shattered bone, the fragments simply reformed, pulled back together by the dark mana that animated them. "They can't win a war of attrition," Jean observed coolly as the wolves found themselves increasingly frustrated. Each time they destroyed a skeletal warrior, it reconstructed itself, while their own injuries accumulated. He traced complex patterns with his twin short swords, dark mana coalescing around the broken bone fragments from his destroyed warriors. The cloud condensed into hundreds of needle-like projectiles that rained down on the wolf pack. Where they struck, dark energy spread outward, withering the crystalline fur that had served as the beast's primary defense. "Your constructs work well together," the support mage commented, impressed by Jin's control. "They're extensions of will, nothing more," Jean replied, his focus unbroken as he directed the assault. Across the battlefield, Ava had transformed into a blur of perpetual motion. Each strike carried the full weight of her body enhanced by perfectly controlled power circulation. Where her fists or feet connected with the ground, crater-like impressions formed, the stone itself yielding to her concentrated force. "You're too slow," she taunted as a wolf lunged for her throat, only to strike empty air as she pivoted away. "And now you're two dead," she added, driving her fist through its crystal-armored skull. Despite facing 12 opponents simultaneously, she maintained perfect positional awareness, never remaining in one place long enough to be surrounded. Her breathing remained measured, her movements economical despite their devastating effect. The first wave lasted 8 minutes before the final beast fell, one of Jin's bone spears piercing the retreating winged serpent as it attempted to return to the arena gates. As the dust settled, their fortress remained untouched. Chapter 314, Mana Fortress Defense, 2. Lucifer descended from the tower to confer briefly with Jin and Ava. "Thoughts?" he asked simply. "They adapted faster than expected to our automated defenses," Jin noted, already adjusting his energy circulation to recover. "I'll modify my approach for the next wave." Ava rolled her shoulders, working out minimal tension. "Nothing I couldn't handle, but these 4 stars were smarter than usual. The next wave will be interesting." "Conserve strength for the final wave," Lucifer advised. "It will test us far more severely." Their conversation was brief and focused on tactical refinement. As they resumed their positions, they noted the state of the other fortresses. 2 had sustained minor damage to their outer walls, while a third was actively repairing a breach. As if responding to the completion of the first wave, the arena gates opened once more. The second wave emerged, 5-star beasts with elemental enhancements, their bodies wreathed in flames, lightning, or toxic miasma. These weren't merely stronger versions of the first wave but entirely different tactical challenges, wielding elemental forces as primary weapons. "Formation Delta," Lucifer called, and the team reconfigured without hesitation. Jin took the offensive lead position this time, his dark mana particularly effective against the elemental constructs. Dark energy spread from Jin's position, creating concentric circles around the fortress perimeter. Where elemental beasts stepped upon this corrupted ground, their power visibly diminished, flames burned lower, lightning crackled with reduced intensity, miasma thinned and dispersed. "Their connection to elemental energy is weakening," Jin explained to the barrier specialist. "Dark mana disrupts the attachment points." Meanwhile, Ava had shifted to a supporting role, positioning herself at the fortress gate. A flame-wreathed tiger charged through a gap in Jin's field, moving with supernatural speed toward the entrance. "I've got this one," Ava called, stepping forward to intercept. Her movements became fluid, almost water-like, as she redirected the tiger's momentum while simultaneously striking precise points along its body. Each impact targeted a key junction point, 17 strikes delivered in the span of 2 seconds. The flames wreathing the tiger guttered and died as its energy pathways collapsed. Without its fiery protection, the beast was just flesh and bone, still formidable, but vulnerable. Ava's final strike targeted the base of its skull, and the massive body crumpled mid-leap. "One less problem," she remarked, already scanning for the next threat. From his position on the tower, Lucifer continued to coordinate the team's overall defense. When a cluster of lightning-enhanced bears broke through Jin's dark field and overwhelmed several skeletal warriors, he identified the critical moment to intervene. "Jin, clear your constructs," he called down, ice energy condensing around his blade until frost crystals formed in the air with each breath. Clearing, Jin confirmed, dissolving his skeletal warriors in the bear's path. Lucifer's strike was singular but devastating, an overhead cut that released a column of absolute cold toward the charging bears. When this freezing energy collided with the bear's electrical shields, a spectacular reaction occurred. The opposing elemental forces created a crystallization effect, transmuting the beasts into frozen statues. "Now!" Lucifer called to the water elementalist, who saw the opportunity he'd created. "On it," she replied, extracting water molecules from the frozen bears to create pressurized jets that targeted approaching fire-wreathed beasts. Steam explosions erupted where superheated flame met pressurized water. The second wave lasted 12 minutes, with 3 breaches of their outer defenses but no damage to the fortress itself. By now, 2 of the original 10 teams had been eliminated, their fortresses crumbling as central cores were compromised. "Final wave approaching," Lucifer announced, his expression unchanged despite the intensifying challenge. 6-star hybrids. The final wave erupted into the arena with calculated violence, shattering through the walls at unexpected points. Massive chimeric beasts with multiple elemental affinities charged the remaining fortresses from all directions simultaneously. These hybrid creatures combined multiple threatening aspects: the speed of predatory cats with the durability of armored reptiles, the destructive force of elemental conduits with the intelligence of higher species. Their changing course, Jean observed as the largest chimera, a 3-headed monstrosity combining lion, eagle, and serpent aspects, headed directly for their central tower. "They're targeting our core, not our defenses." As expected, Lucifer replied. "Time for convergence." With a precise sequence of hand movements, he activated the fortress's central array, connecting all 6 team members to the power core. Energy pulsed through predefined channels, temporarily boosting their capabilities but requiring perfect synchronization. "This feels substantial," Jean remarked, dark mana expanding exponentially around him. His undead warriors transformed into fully armored death knights with spectral weapons that left trailing shadows where they passed. "Let's make use of it." Jean directed his death knights to intercept the smaller chimeras, their dark weapons effectively disrupting the hybrid beasts' multiple energy signatures. Wounded chimeras found their hybrid aspects fighting against each other, elemental affinities destabilizing. Ava, similarly enhanced by the core connection, moved with unprecedented speed. "I'll handle the flankers," she called, targeting the beasts attempting to circle around their main defenses. Her body seemed to blur as she moved faster than ordinary vision could track, appearing at multiple points around the fortress perimeter almost simultaneously. "These things are tough," she grunted after delivering a series of strikes that would have killed any 5-star beast instantly, only to have the 6-star creature stagger but continue its advance. "But not tough enough." She redoubled her assault, targeting the same impact point repeatedly until even the reinforced structure gave way. While his teammates handled the perimeter threats, Lucifer descended from the tower to confront the primary danger, the 3-headed chimera that had nearly reached their walls. Unlike the frantic defense occurring at other fortresses, his movements remained measured, each step calculated to intercept the beast at the optimal position. The chimera sensed his approach and responded with overwhelming force. The lion head roared, releasing a cone of concentrated fire that melted stone where it touched. Simultaneously, the eagle head's eyes glowed with electrical energy before discharging lightning strikes that forked through the air. The serpent head completed the assault by spitting jets of corrosive venom that hissed and bubbled on contact with the ground. Lucifer activated both his gifts simultaneously, his god's eyes perceiving the precise composition and trajectory of each attack while his yin-yang body manifested counterbalancing elements. Ice formed a path through the flames, earth elements absorbed and grounded the lightning, and water currents diluted and redirected the venom. "You're powerful," Lucifer acknowledged as he engaged the beast directly. "But ultimately predictable." The fourth and final movement of the Northern Peak art that Lucifer had managed to achieve manifested through him. Avalanche Tempest. The air around him became a maelstrom of elemental forces, perfectly harmonized according to principles few could comprehend. His sword traced complex patterns that seemed to bend the very fabric of space, each motion precisely calculated to intercept one of the chimera's attacks. The beast staggered, its coordinated attack pattern disrupted by Lucifer's perfect counters. It attempted to adapt, changing tactics to focus all 3 heads' attacks on a single vector, a concentrated beam of combined elements. "Jean, now!" Lucifer called, deliberately creating an opening in his defense. Jin's death knights encircled the chimera, their weapons striking in perfect unison. Each blade targeted a different vulnerability within the beast's body, severing connections and disrupting its energy flow. The chimera's concentrated beam faltered as its internal coordination collapsed. "Ava!" Jean called, maintaining pressure on the beast. "Already here," she replied, launching herself into a controlled descent above the chimera. Her final technique manifested as she rotated midair, generating centrifugal force that concentrated all her accumulated power. Both fists led her downward trajectory, crimson energy swirling around them in tightly compressed spirals. Her impact struck the chimera's central mass, the point where all three aspects connected and where its composite nature was most vulnerable. The force transferred through the beast's body in visible shockwaves, shattering internal structures. Cracks spread across its hide, leaking multicolored energy. "It's weakened, but not defeated," Ava called out, flipping backward to avoid the creature's desperate counterattack. "Still dangerous." Lucifer, recognizing the critical moment, stepped forward. The time for measured defense had passed. Now was the moment for overwhelming force. His blade glowed with the combined light of order and chaos, the white and black aspects of his yin-yang body fully manifested. "Enough," he stated simply, his voice carrying absolute conviction. With a movement too fast for normal eyes to track, Lucifer executed a perfect cutting arc that sliced through the chimera's massive body. The raw power behind the strike was staggering, not just physical force but concentrated elemental energy that overwhelmed the beast's remaining defenses. The three heads roared, screeched, and hissed in unison as the blade cleaved through them, its passage leaving trails of elemental disruption that prevented regeneration. The chimera's body collapsed, its enormous mass crashing to the ground with an impact that shook the arena floor. "Impressive," Jean noted calmly, banishing his constructs now that the threat was neutralized. "Show off," Ava added with a grin, landing beside the fallen beast. "But effective." As the chimeras remained settled, a signal rang out across the arena, a resonant tone that indicated the final wave had been repelled. Only 4 fortresses remained standing, their teams having successfully defended against all 3 increasingly difficult waves of attackers. The judges' assessment was swift and unanimous. Fortress 3 had demonstrated exceptional performance across all evaluation criteria. Not only had they repelled all waves with minimal damage to their structure, but they had displayed remarkable teamwork, tactical adaptation, and effective use of the core enhancement. The point distribution reflected both individual performance and team contribution. Lucifer Windward placed first overall, his command presence and perfect execution of the Northern Peak art earning him the highest individual score. His raw power and strategic utilization of the team's capabilities had been the cornerstone of their success. Jean Ashbluff secured second place, his dark mana control proving crucial to their defensive strategy. The judges particularly noted his adaptation to each wave's specific threats, modifying his undead forces to counter the unique properties of the attacking beasts. Ava Peng took third place, her systematic elimination of flanking threats recognized as a key factor in their victory. Her ability to precisely target weaknesses and deliver overwhelming force at critical moments had repeatedly turned the tide in their favor. As the competitors gathered for the announcement of results, Lucifer glanced at his teammates. "We worked well together," he said, a rare acknowledgement from the typically reserved prince. The Inter Academy Festival had begun in earnest, and with it, the true measure of this generation's potential. Chapter 315, Dimensional Labyrinth, 1. The second event of the Inter Academy Festival was the Dimensional Labyrinth. Unlike the Mana Fortress defense, which tested team coordination against external threats, this challenge plunged 60 individual competitors into an ever-shifting maze where the laws of physics themselves were negotiable. The event was designed to test adaptability, spatial awareness, and problem-solving under pressure, qualities essential for any high-ranking mage operating in unstable environments. The massive arena had been transformed overnight. Gone were the fortress structures, replaced by a sprawling labyrinth constructed of gleaming obsidian walls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Viewing screens positioned around the spectator stands displayed various sections of the maze, allowing the audience to track competitors' progress through the otherwise opaque structure. Professor Valerie addressed the participants gathered at the entrance. "The dimensional labyrinth is not merely a maze," she explained, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "It's a test of your ability to navigate through spatial distortions. The paths will shift, gravity will reorient, and what appears as a straight line may lead you in circles." She gestured to the first corridor, which seemed to stretch into infinite darkness despite the arena's finite dimensions. "Your objective is simple: reach the center and retrieve a token, then find your way back out. Both speed and the obstacles you overcome will factor into your final score." Among the 60 competitors standing at the threshold, Clana Lopez looked uncharacteristically alert, her usually sleepy expression replaced by focused calculation. The white rank mage from Mythos Academy was known for her perpetual exhaustion, but today even she recognized the need for full consciousness. Her mind aspect gift, spell synergy, would be crucial in a challenge where adaptability trumped raw power. Nearby stood Aaron Myriad, his imposing figure casting a long shadow. The Myriad family's heir wore the distinctive dark armor of his lineage's tradition, modified to accommodate the sleek aesthetics of his academy uniform. His axe, a masterwork of engineering and magical craftsmanship, rested against his shoulder with deceptive casualness. The Dark Knight's expression revealed nothing, but his eyes, sharp and assessing, continuously scanned his competition. "Competitors, take your positions," Valerie commanded. "You will enter at 10-second intervals. Your time begins the moment you cross the threshold." The first student stepped forward, disappearing into the darkness of the labyrinth's entrance. Then another, and another, each vanishing at precisely timed intervals. When Aaron's turn came, he strode forward with measured confidence, the darkness swallowing him whole without hesitation. Several positions later, Clana approached the entrance. Unlike many who tensed or prepared dramatic entrances, she simply yawned, stretched, and stepped forward as if walking into her bedroom rather than one of the most challenging events of the festival. "What a pain," were her final words before the darkness claimed her. Clana emerged into a corridor that seemed standard enough, smooth obsidian walls stretching forward until they met at a junction 30 meters ahead. The ceiling glowed with embedded light strips, providing adequate illumination without revealing too much detail. It would have been entirely unremarkable if not for the slight distortion in her peripheral vision, like reality itself was slightly out of focus. "Dimensional manipulation," she muttered, immediately activating her primary defensive spells. Rather than rushing forward like many competitors would, she took a moment to analyze the environment. With her mind aspect gift, she could maintain multiple spells simultaneously, layering them for maximum effect. A detection array formed around her, thin lines of blue light creating a sphere that would alert her to nearby threats or dimensional instabilities. The initial junction offered 3 choices: left, right, or continuing straight. Clana closed her eyes briefly, allowing her detection sphere to pulse outward. The feedback was immediate but confusing. All 3 paths registered as both valid and invalid simultaneously. Non-Euclidean geometry, she sighed. Of course they'd start with the basics. She chose the right path, not because it seemed correct but because it triggered her detection spell in a slightly different way than the others, a subtle variance that suggested something unique. As she turned the corner, the corridor appeared to stretch normally for several meters before abruptly ending in a solid wall. "Spatial fold," Clana observed, approaching the wall cautiously. Her detection sphere indicated the presence of a dimensional anomaly. The wall wasn't truly solid but a visual manifestation of space folding back on itself. With careful manipulation of her own mana, she layered 3 spells simultaneously: a spatial anchor to prevent herself from being disoriented, a reality perception enhancer to see through the illusion, and a mana shell to protect against potential backlash. She stepped forward, and instead of colliding with solid stone, she passed through what felt like a membrane of resistance before emerging in a chamber with 5 identical doors. The gravity shifted subtly, what had been the floor now angling at 15 degrees, requiring continuous adjustment to maintain balance. "This is going to be so troublesome," she muttered, already mapping the room's dimensional inconsistencies in her mind. Meanwhile, Aaron Myriad had encountered his first significant challenge. The Dark Knight found himself in a spherical chamber where gravity pulled toward the center rather than downward, forcing him to stand on a curved surface while objects floated in the void at the room's heart. 3 crystalline keys hovered there, each pulsing with different colored light. Unlike many competitors who might have attempted complex mana manipulations to retrieve the keys, Aaron relied on the straightforward approach that had made the Myriad family legendary on the battlefield. Dark mana surged through his body, reinforcing his physical capabilities beyond normal human limits. With a single powerful leap, he launched himself toward the floating keys, using the momentum to snatch all 3 before gravity reasserted its pull. He landed on the opposite side of the spherical chamber, boots finding purchase on the curved wall with practiced ease. The first movement of his family's Grade 5 art, Eclipse Cleaver, manifested not as a combat technique but as a stabilizing force, dark mana spreading from his feet to anchor him against the disorienting gravity. Primitive, he assessed aloud, examining the keys in his palm. Each corresponded to one of the 3 exits from the chamber, but only one would lead deeper into the labyrinth rather than into a trap or dead end. Aaron closed his eyes, extending his senses through his dark mana. The Myriad family art was primarily offensive in nature, but generations of Dark Knights had learned to utilize its properties for detection as well. Dark mana responded differently to various spatial distortions, flowing more freely toward genuine paths and resisting falsities. The red key resonated most strongly, vibrating slightly against his palm. Without hesitation, Aaron approached the corresponding door, inserted the key, and stepped through into a corridor where the walls pulsed with crimson light. "Too easy," he remarked, continuing forward with confident strides. Clanna had made significant progress through the labyrinth, her approach methodical and energy efficient. Unlike competitors who exhausted themselves forcing their way through obstacles, she analyzed each challenge before committing to a solution. In a section where gravity reversed every 30 seconds, she simply synchronized her movements to the shift pattern, timing her progress to utilize both floor and ceiling as walking surfaces. When confronted with a corridor that looped endlessly, she identified the mathematical pattern in the recursion and cast a targeted spell that broke the cycle at precisely the right moment. Her current challenge, however, proved more complex. She stood at the edge of what appeared to be a bottomless chasm, spanning at least 50 meters across. Floating platforms drifted in the void, moving in patterns that initially seemed random but revealed subtle organization upon closer inspection. They're following a sequence, she determined after watching for several minutes. Many competitors would have already attempted the crossing, either succeeding through luck or falling into whatever penalty awaited below. Clanna, however, had learned long ago that observation often saved more energy than action. Once she'd identified the pattern, she layered 3 spells simultaneously through her spell synergy gift, a minor levitation effect to extend her jumps, a temporal perception enhancement to better time her movements, and a mana tether that could pull her to safety if she miscalculated. With these preparations complete, she began the crossing, each leap precisely calibrated to land on platforms at the exact moment they aligned. Halfway across, the pattern suddenly shifted, an expected complication in an event designed to test adaptability. Without breaking stride, Clanna adjusted her approach, recalculating trajectories mid-jump. Her expression remained calm, almost bored, even as she executed a particularly difficult maneuver that required her to rebound between 2 rapidly moving platforms. "All this jumping is exhausting," she complained to no one in particular, even as she completed the crossing with more grace than most professional acrobats could manage. The path beyond the chasm led downward, spiraling into what her detection spells identified as a major convergence point, likely the central chamber where the tokens awaited. Aaron Myriad encountered his own set of challenges as he progressed deeper into the labyrinth. A corridor filled with spectral guardians tested his combat prowess, though the creatures proved little challenge for the heir of the Myriad family. His axe moved with brutal efficiency, dark mana enhancing each strike as he executed the second movement of Eclipse Cleaver, Midnight Reaping. The spectral entities dissolved under his assault, their essence dispersing into the air. Aaron didn't slow his pace, moving through the now empty corridor with the same measured stride he'd maintained throughout the challenge. Chapter 316, Dimensional Labyrinth, 2. His next obstacle was more sophisticated, a chamber where multiple versions of himself appeared, each mirroring his movements from slightly different angles. The disorientation would have been complete for most competitors, but Aaron had trained extensively in environments designed to confuse and mislead. The third movement of Eclipse Cleaver, Shadow's Truth, allowed him to extend his perception beyond visual stimuli. Dark mana spread outward from his core, identifying the single path where resistance was lowest, the true way forward among dozens of illusions. With a decisive step, he moved toward an apparently solid wall, passing through it as though it were merely mist. The illusions collapsed behind him, the chamber reverting to its actual configuration as he departed. Aaron's progress continued at a steady, relentless pace. While other competitors might have been faster in certain sections or more creative in their solutions, none matched his consistent forward momentum. He wasted no movement, no energy, no time, each decision made with absolute conviction and executed with precision. As he descended a spiraling staircase that occasionally inverted direction, requiring him to adjust his orientation multiple times, Aaron detected the presence of another competitor ahead. The signature was distinctive, multiple mana patterns layered with unusual efficiency. Lopez, he identified, recognizing her unique approach to spellcasting. The Dark Knight allowed himself the faintest smile. Competition at last. The central chamber of the dimensional labyrinth lived up to its importance. Unlike the corridors and intermediate challenges, this vast spherical space seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Sections of the floor, walls, and ceiling phased in and out of reality, while gravity shifted unpredictably across different zones. At the center, suspended in a column of light, floated 60 tokens, small crystalline objects that pulsed with inner radiance. Clana emerged from one of the dozen entrances to the chamber, taking a moment to assess the situation. Several competitors had already arrived and were attempting to reach the tokens, each utilizing their own approach to navigate the chaotic environment. Fascinating design, she admitted, genuinely impressed by the complexity of the dimensional manipulations at work. Rather than rushing forward, she established a safe position near her entrance, layering observation spells to analyze the pattern of shifts occurring throughout the chamber. From another entrance emerged Aaron Myriad, his dark armor absorbing the shifting lights of the chamber. He immediately assessed the situation, noting the positions of other competitors and the various hazards between himself and the objective. Unlike Clana's methodical approach, Aaron relied on calculated risk. Dark mana surged through his body as he activated the fourth movement of Eclipse Cleaver, Void Traverse. His form seemed to blur slightly, not quite teleportation but a technique that allowed him to move through spaces other than the most direct path, temporarily stepping outside normal dimensional constraints. With 3 powerful surges, he crossed the chamber, avoiding the worst of the gravitational shifts and phasing obstacles. He reached the central column seconds before anyone else, claiming one of the tokens with a decisive grab. Just as he secured his prize, a massive dimensional shift rippled through the chamber. The gravity points reconfigured, what had been relatively stable zones becoming dangerous, while new paths opened where none had existed before. This was the expected escalation, the labyrinth adapting to the presence of competitors in its heart. Clana observed the shift with clinical interest, noting how the patterns had changed. While other competitors scrambled to adapt, she had already layered her spells in anticipation of such alterations. With precise timing, she launched herself forward when a momentary alignment created an optimal path. Her movement through the chamber appeared almost lazy to observers, floating rather than leaping, drifting rather than running. But each motion was perfectly calculated to conserve energy while ensuring progress. She reached the central column shortly after Aaron had departed, claiming her own token with a casual pluck. Now for the troublesome part, she sighed, knowing that exiting the labyrinth would prove more challenging than reaching its center. The return journey confirmed Clana's assessment. While the path to the center had been difficult but relatively straightforward, the exit routes twisted reality far more aggressively. Corridors reconnected to unexpected chambers, staircases led to the same floor they'd started from, and in some sections, the very concept of direction became meaningless. Aaron faced these challenges with the same methodical determination that had characterized his entire approach. When confronted with a corridor that seemed to extend infinitely, he applied dark mana to his token, causing it to resonate with the labyrinth's exit. The resulting harmonic revealed the true path, a nearly invisible doorway embedded in what appeared to be solid wall. His progress, while steady, was not unchallenged. The labyrinth seemed to specifically target his reliance on direct approaches, presenting obstacles that required more subtle solutions than force or conventional navigation techniques. In a particularly difficult section, Aaron found himself in a chamber where every surface was a perfect mirror, reflecting not just his image but his mana signature as well. Hundreds of identical Dark Knights moved in perfect synchronization with him, each reflection so perfect that distinguishing reality from illusion became nearly impossible. For the first time, Aaron hesitated, his confidence momentarily shaken by the perfect disorientation. Then, with deliberate calm, he planted his axe on the floor before him, channeling dark mana through the weapon and into the chamber itself. Enough games, he stated, his voice even. The fifth and final movement of Eclipse Cleaver, Absolute Night, manifested not as an attack but as a negation. Darkness spread from his axe, temporarily absorbing all light in the chamber and, consequently, eliminating the reflections. In that moment of perfect blackness, discernible only to him through his affinity with dark mana, Eren identified the true exit, the single point where his energy connected with something beyond the chamber. With 3 purposeful strides, he reached it, emerging into a straightforward corridor just as light returned to the mirrored room behind him. Clana's return journey presented different challenges, specifically designed to test the limits of her spell synergy gift. In a section where the laws of magic themselves seemed to fluctuate, spells that should have functioned perfectly began to interact in unpredictable ways. Rather than forcing her approach, Clana adapted. Where her layered detection spells became unreliable, she switched to sequential casting, less efficient but more stable in the fluctuating environment. When even that proved problematic, she fell back on fundamental magical principles, manipulating raw mana directly rather than through formalized spells. "They're really making me work for this," she muttered, uncharacteristically impressed by the sophistication of the challenge. Her usually sleepy expression had given way to focused concentration, a rare sight for those accustomed to her perpetual state of apparent disinterest. Her current obstacle was particularly devious, a corridor that responded to magical energy by actively redirecting it against the caster. Any spell she initiated was immediately reflected back, potentially trapping her in her own magical effects. Clana considered the problem from multiple angles before arriving at an elegant solution. Rather than casting spells outward, she inverted her approach, creating a negative space within her own mana field, essentially casting a non-spell that the corridor couldn't reflect because there was nothing to redirect. This technique required extraordinary precision and control, maintaining the perfect absence of energy rather than its presence. For most mages, such an approach would be impossible, but Clana's gift allowed her to conceptualize and execute the complex manipulation. She progressed through the corridor untouched by her own reflected magic, emerging into what appeared to be the final section before the exit. Ahead lay a straightforward path that nonetheless felt wrong to her trained senses. "Too easy," she murmured, extending her perception. Sure enough, what appeared as a direct route was actually the most elaborate illusion yet, a false exit that would loop competitors back to an earlier section of the labyrinth, wasting precious time. With careful probing, Clana identified the actual exit, disguised as a dead end to the right of the illusory path. A simple disruption spell revealed the truth, the false wall dissolving to show the real way forward. Eren Myriad emerged from the labyrinth first, stepping through the exit with the same composed demeanor he'd maintained throughout the challenge. His time was exceptional, nearly 20 minutes faster than the previous record for similar events. The crowd erupted in applause as he presented his token to the judges, confirming his successful completion. "Impressive navigation, Mr. Myriad," Professor Valerie acknowledged. "Your direct approach served you well." Eren inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement but offered no comment. He moved to the designated waiting area for completed competitors, his focus already turning to analysis of his performance rather than celebration of his likely victory. 7 minutes later, Clana Lopez emerged, her expression suggesting mild annoyance rather than the exhaustion most competitors displayed. She handed over her token with a casual gesture, stifling a yawn. "That was more interesting than I expected," she admitted when prompted for comment. "Still troublesome, though." As more competitors completed the challenge, many taking significantly longer or requiring extraction when hopelessly lost, the final rankings became clear. Eren Myriad secured first place with his exceptional time and the challenges he'd overcome. Clana Lopez took second, her methodical efficiency proving nearly as effective as Eren's more direct approach. During the awards ceremony, the two white rankers acknowledged each other with professional respect. Eren's slight nod met with Clana's half-interested glance, neither particularly celebratory, but both recognizing the skill the other had demonstrated. "Your approach was unexpected," Eren commented during a brief moment when they stood side by side on the podium. "Yours was predictable," Clana replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than insulting. "But effective." The Dark Knight's lips curved in the barest suggestion of a smile. Next time, I won't underestimate your efficiency. Next time, I won't oversleep before the event, Clanna countered, stifling another yawn. Their exchange went largely unnoticed amid the festival's pageantry, but those with the perception to understand recognized it for what it was, a rare acknowledgement between two exceptional talents who approached their craft from opposite directions yet achieved remarkably similar results. The dimensional labyrinth had revealed not just their individual capabilities but the validity of different approaches to the same challenges, a lesson that would serve competitors well in the events to come. From the audience, Arthur Nightingale watched with focused interest. Clanna had performed even better than he'd expected, her seemingly lazy approach concealing extraordinary magical precision. He made mental notes about both top performers, cataloging their strengths and potential weaknesses for future reference. The festival continued to unfold according to schedule, each event revealing more about the exceptional generation that had gathered to test their limits against one another. Chapter 317, Saintess's Heart, 1. The first day's chaos settled into something that vaguely resembled peace, if peace came with floating camera drones, silent reputation warfare, and aggressive handshakes from people who wanted to sell you their surname on business cards printed with nano ink that changed color depending on how impressed they were with your response. The events were over, and the rankings were in. Lucifer Windward, Jean Ashbluff, Aaron Marriott, Ava Peng, Clanna Lopez. And, really, those were the only names that mattered, as only they would make it to the crown challenge and matter at the same time. The rest were just so much statistical background noise, the kind of names that would appear in tiny font in historical records that future students might be forced to memorize if they were particularly unlucky in their choice of professors. Lucifer at the top was no surprise. He moved like the world owed him its best performance and was happy to deliver it on a silver platter with a side of, "Please sir, would you like some more?" Jean was close behind. Having raised an army of corpses and calmly walked them through the field like he was taking them on a pleasant stroll to a graveyard picnic. Aaron, the quiet one from Gravehold, had shown up and sliced everything with his axe in the manner of someone who didn't so much cut things as suggest to the universe that being solid was an optional extra some materials might want to reconsider. Ava's fists had done enough talking that she didn't have to, her knuckles practically delivering full philosophical dissertations with each impact. And Clanna, well, Clanna was Clanna. Probably took a nap halfway through and still made the cut, her unconscious body somehow outperforming half the fully awake competitors. The holographic displays throughout the academy grounds continuously cycled through highlights from the day's events, snippets of spectacular moments replaying above the heads of passing students. Lucifer's perfect execution of Winter's Ascent flickered 10 feet tall near the cafeteria entrance, his blade trailing frost particles that dissipated into the actual air beneath the projection. The Academy's quantum display technology had improved since last year. Now the holograms carried trace sensory outputs, so anyone walking under Jin's replay would feel the faint chill of death energy raising goosebumps on their skin. Elemental Conquest was next. Rachel and Arya Gu would be there. So would Lucifer, because of course he would. The festival probably wouldn't allow events to start unless he'd signed up for them, just to maintain tradition. Tactical Siege, though, that would be the real spectacle. Jack, Ren, Ian, Ciola, and Aaron. A cocktail of ego, raw power, and repressed trauma, all shaken together and served in a goblet made of competitive violence. That one would be fun to watch. The sort of fun that involves potential property damage and spectacular displays of magical one-upmanship that would leave the arena looking like it had been redecorated by a committee of exploding paintballs with artistic differences. "Arthur, what are you thinking?" Rachel asked, her shoulder brushing against mine with the careful precision of someone who had calculated the exact pressure and duration that would seem accidental while being anything but. I turned to her. Simple skirt, loose t-shirt, golden hair tied up in a braid. Casual. Comfortable. Beautiful. She was the only person I knew who could eat a cone of mango ice cream and still somehow look like she'd stepped out of a dream, the flavor indicator on the cone's wrapper pulsing a cheery orange that matched her nail polish exactly. "I was wondering where the other girls are," I said, half to myself, scanning the crowded courtyard. She coughed into her hand. "Light." "Suspiciously so." I stared at her. Her eyes didn't quite meet mine, focusing instead on a point approximately 3 inches to the left of my ear, as if that particular patch of air had suddenly become fascinating. She scratched her cheek. A little too quickly. Her fingernails left temporary white marks that faded with the pink flush rising to replace them. At this point she's not even pretending, Luna muttered in my head, her mental voice carrying the exasperated tone of someone watching a particularly transparent magic trick. I swear, if she says they're just busy, she probably vaporized them with a prayer. Left nothing behind but small piles of sanctified dust and those little tags that tell you not to remove them from pillows. I didn't disagree. Rachel's competitive streak was less a streak and more an entire paint factory dedicated to the production of victory in all its chromatic variations. You've got ice cream on your lips, I said as I leaned forward and wiped it off with my thumb, the nano-chilled dessert still cold against my skin. Rachel froze. Mid-bite, mid-blink, mid-breath. Completely still. I looked at the smudge of mango on my thumb and, without much thought, licked it off. The flavor receptors in my tongue registered the precise balance of sweetness and acidity, alongside trace elements of the enhancement compounds designed to stimulate pleasurable neural responses. Her face went red. Not blush red, emergency level, system failure red. The kind of red that suggested her internal cooling systems had just encountered a fatal error and were now venting excess heat through her skin in a desperate attempt to prevent complete shutdown. I thought a princess like you was supposed to be elegant, I said, tilting my head. The Academy's ambient light sensors adjusted slightly to accommodate her sudden change in color temperature. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. She looked like a goldfish trying to load a response from a crashed neural network, her cognitive processes apparently stuck in an infinite boot cycle. Incredible, Luna said in awe, the mental equivalent of slow clapping echoing through my consciousness. Truly. An art form. Weaponized flotation with the precision targeting system of a military-grade drone. If they taught this at the Academy, you'd be the professor emeritus. Hey Arthur, she finally stammered, fingers twisting into her hair like she was trying to strangle the embarrassment out of it, individual strands catching the afternoon sunlight and refracting it into tiny golden prisms. When is your birthday? You never told me. The question emerged with all the smooth relevance of a submarine in a desert. I tilted my head. Don't worry about it. The dismissal was casual, designed to create more questions than it answered. Wah, she started, but I leaned in again, close enough that I could see every flake of gold in her blue eyes, the heterochromatic patterns that gene therapists would charge small fortunes to replicate in less fortunate irises. You look really pretty today, I whispered, low and smooth, my voice calibrated to maximum disruptive potential. Don't you think it's a little dangerous to be out here alone without the other 3 girls to keep you in check? The words carried just enough suggestion to send her imagination racing. Her ears turned pink. Then red. Then I swear I saw steam, as if her body had decided that conventional blood circulation was insufficient for the current crisis and had improvised an emergency pressure release valve. She looked like she might explode. I didn't think today was the day, Rachel muttered, her voice dropping to a register that suggested confidential information was about to be exchanged, but if it is, I will do my B-dash. We are not going that far, I interrupted her as I felt Luna's emotions filter through to me, a mixture of horrified amusement and secondhand embarrassment that threatened to overwhelm my own emotional processors. Arthur. The Saintess. Luna began again as I ignored her with the practiced ease of someone who had developed selective hearing as a survival mechanism. At this point, she should know better than to comment on situations that were already accelerating beyond advisory capacity. Come to my room, I said, the 4 words causing Rachel's pupils to dilate so rapidly that I briefly worried about retinal damage. The Academy's medical AI probably flagged her vitals for monitoring at this point, her heart rate suggesting either intense physical activity or an imminent cardiac episode. As we walked toward my dorms, Rachel's emotional state cycled through variations like a quantum particle refusing to settle on a fixed position. One moment she was smiling with the radiant certainty of someone who had just won a cosmic lottery, the next she was examining the ground with the intense focus of a person who had suddenly discovered that shoe design was their life's passion. Incredible, a person can change emotions so easily, I thought as we reached my room in the Ophelia dorms. By the time we entered, Rachel began giggling. Not the poised, controlled laugh of a saintess, but the slightly manic giggle of someone whose brain had decided that if it couldn't process current events logically, it might as well enjoy the ride. She's even giggling like a pervert now, Luna said in my mind, her tone suggesting she was mentally taking notes for future reference or possibly blackmail. Shut up, I responded as I picked up Rachel, her weight registering as slightly less than expected, possibly due to the excitement causing her to unconsciously channel mana into passive levitation, and put her on my lap. And I kissed her. Deeply. Chapter 318, Saintess's Heart, 2. I was loved from birth. Everyone loved me. Everyone spoiled me. There was nothing I lacked as both the princess of the northern continent and one who was considered the future saintess with the highest pure light talent in the world. When I took my first steps, the photographers documented it from 17 different angles. My childish drawings were preserved in climate-controlled archives as if they were great works of art. When I sneezed, 3 medical drones would appear with tissue dispensers and diagnostic scanners. But life wasn't perfect. My mother's mental breakdown showed me that. And I vowed to myself, I won't love anyone fully. Because loving means to allow other people to hurt you. And that was something I did not want at all. Other than my father and sister, I can't love anybody. After that day, I built walls. Not the visible kind, those would be unseemly for a princess and future saintess. My walls were made of perfect smiles, of careful kindness administered in precise doses, of academic excellence that kept everyone at a calculable distance. I became the person everyone thought I was without ever letting them see who I might actually be. I was unfailingly kind to everyone I met. It wasn't difficult. Kindness is a simple algorithm once you understand its components. Make eye contact for 2.7 seconds. Remember one personal detail about each person. Ask follow-up questions about their interests. The Palace Etiquette AIs had programmed these patterns into me since infancy, and I executed them with flawless precision. Rachel is so approachable, they would say. Rachel makes everyone feel special, they would marvel. Rachel has time for everyone, they would observe. What they didn't realize was that being kind to everyone equally meant being close to no one in particular. It was a perfect defense system. People felt appreciated without actually getting near me. They felt valued without actually knowing my values. They felt connected without actually forming a connection. At the academy, this system worked flawlessly. The professors thought I was dedicated because I submitted assignments precisely 3 hours before deadline, not so early as to seem eager, not so late as to seem careless. A girl I talked to thought we were best friends because I remembered her maternal grandmother's name and asked about her collection of Southern Continent 16th century musical instruments. I kept everyone in their proper orbits, close enough to admire the light, far enough that they couldn't touch its source. Then I met Arthur. And now, somehow, I'm here in his room, making a complete fool of myself. His lips are on mine and my carefully constructed system is failing catastrophically. My hands don't know where to go, they hover awkwardly before settling on his shoulders, then move to his hair, then back to his shoulders. I'm not executing the perfect kissing technique I researched. I'm not maintaining the optimal heart rate for romantic encounters. I'm just feeling things. Messy, unquantifiable things. His hands are warm against my back, steady where I am anything but. I'm suddenly aware of how thin the fabric of my t-shirt is, how every point of contact between us seems to generate impossible heat. I should be cataloging this experience for future reference. I should be analyzing his technique for educational purposes. I should be maintaining at least partial emotional detachment. I am doing none of these things. Instead, I am kissing Arthur Nightingale with a desperate enthusiasm that would shock the entire northern continent if they could see their poised princess now. The walls I've built so carefully are crumbling faster than the palace's defensive systems could track, and worst of all, I don't care. Let them fall. Let him in. This is terrifying. This is wonderful. This is possibly the stupidest thing I've ever done. And I don't want it to stop. I love you, I said as we separated, both of us panting. I loved him. Just like those foolish teenage girls I read about and scoffed at, girls who wore their hearts on their sleeves instead of keeping them safely locked. The ones who made terrible decisions for the sake of feelings rather than following properly calculated risk assessments. I fell in love too. I fell in love deeply. I fell in love with this man I was willing to give myself to. Even if he asked for me to give him half of the northern continent my family ruled, I would give it to him by figuring out some way to do so. He was a man I was willing to go mad for. He was a man I was willing to give up everything for. He was a piece of trash who seduced 3 other girls at the same time and who knows how many more. 'Cause he was that damn irresistible. His intelligence that seemed to predict movements 3 steps ahead, like he'd already read the strategy guide to a game everyone else was playing blind. His strength that wasn't just physical but something that radiated from him like a perfectly calibrated force field. Yet his kindness, surprising and unpredictable, appearing in moments when even the most sophisticated pattern recognition software would have predicted selfishness instead. I couldn't keep myself from looking at him, my eyes apparently having decided that autonomous function was overrated and preferred manual override set to stare at Arthur. I knew I loved him from long ago. Possibly from the moment he'd looked at me not as the saintess or the princess, but as Rachel, a distinction so few people ever made that my brain had filed it under statistical anomalies worth further investigation. I knew I wanted him for myself, an embarrassingly primitive instinct. I knew I wanted to go as far as imprisoning him, a fantasy I'd entertained that involved a very comfortable cell with excellent amenities and me. Yet, why was this still sending fire through my veins? Why was my brain tracing the delicate touch of his hand so precisely? Why did I wish to treasure this moment we found ourselves in? Foolish. Foolish. My love was foolish and would definitely receive a failing grade in any rational decision-making assessment. Yet I loved him regardless. With the kind of stubborn dedication usually reserved for particularly fanatic religious converts or people who insist their ancient, constantly malfunctioning technology is vintage and therefore superior. Arthur, I whispered in his ear as our fingers interlocked against each other, our hands fitting together with an ergonomic perfection. Do you want to? I asked as my hand went on the hem of my shirt. Arthur placed his other hand on top of mine, his palm warm against my knuckles. No, he responded before kissing me again, the kiss somehow managing to be both gentle and firm. And oddly, his refusal didn't sting. Instead, it felt like protection, not the overprotective shields I'd grown up with, but something chosen rather than imposed. Something that said, I want this too, but not yet, not like this, without needing to articulate the words. Which was, perhaps, the most foolish thing of all, that even in denial, he made me love him more. Chapter 319, Elemental Conquest. The third event of the Inter Academy Festival dawned with appropriate elemental drama, a sunrise painted in vibrant oranges and reds that seemed designed specifically for the occasion, as if the sky itself was setting the stage. Elemental Conquest was widely considered one of the festival's most visually spectacular events, combining raw power with precision control in a way that transformed combat into art. The arena had been reconfigured overnight into an expansive battlefield divided into distinct environmental zones, a central volcanic field surrounded by forested areas, water features, mountain terrain, and wind-swept plains. Elemental nodes pulsed throughout these regions, glowing beacons that represented the primary objective: capture and hold these power sources to enhance one's own elemental affinity while weakening opponents. Contestants, take your positions, she announced. Elemental Conquest begins in 5 minutes. As they moved toward the arena, Lucifer found himself walking beside Rachel. Rachel's sapphire eyes flicked to him, but she didn't say anything. Contestants, Professor Valerie's voice echoed across the arena, Elemental Conquest begins in 30 seconds. Your objective is to capture and maintain control of the elemental nodes. Points will be awarded for duration of control and strategic utilization of enhanced abilities. Deliberate injury to opponents is grounds for disqualification. This is a conquest event, not combat. The countdown appeared as massive holographic numbers floating above the arena's center. As it reached 0, a resonant tone signaled the start, and 60 contestants surged forward from their starting positions. The first moments were chaos, a rush of bodies and elemental powers as competitors raced for the nearest nodes. A Serpentstone water mage slipped on ice created by an Ashenhold opponent, colliding with 2 others and creating a tangled pile of limbs and curses. A wind specialist from Pillin used their affinity to leap high above the melee, only to be caught in a sudden updraft that sent them tumbling off course. Amateur hour, Arya muttered as she sidestepped the confusion, maintaining a direct course toward the central volcanic zone. A bulky earth manipulator attempted to block her path, raising a stone barrier directly in front of her. Without breaking stride, Arya executed a spinning kick that left a trail of flames, the heat so intense that the stone cracked and split apart before she even made contact. "Out of my way, mountain boy," she called over her shoulder as she passed through the gap, leaving the earth manipulator staring in disbelief at his shattered defense. Lucifer's approach contrasted sharply with the frantic energy around him. While others rushed and collided, he walked calmly forward, activating his yin-yang body gift. 6 elemental energies manifested around him: fire, ice, water, lightning, wind, and earth, orbiting in perfect harmony as he assessed the developing battlefield. "Is he strolling?" a spectator asked incredulously. From his elevated position, Lucifer surveyed the battlefield like a general. 3 key nodes formed a strategic triangle in the central region, targets that would give him control over a significant portion of the arena. With a precision that spoke of countless training hours, he plotted his course. An earth node stood closest. As he descended toward it, 3 competitors converged on the same target, determined to claim it first. Lucifer didn't accelerate or change course. Instead, he simply channeled lightning through his right hand and earth energy through his left. When the first competitor attempted to intercept him, Lucifer touched the ground between them. The resulting controlled shock wave sent all 3 challengers stumbling backward without causing actual harm. "My apologies," he said, his tone more formal than apologetic. "This particular node is necessary for my strategy." "You smug," one of the competitors, a muscular girl with earth affinity tattoos covering her arms, launched herself at him. Lucifer sidestepped her attack with minimal movement, simultaneously placing his palm on the node. The earth around it responded immediately, forming a protective barrier that completed itself just as the girl's fist would have connected with his shoulder. "Perhaps try the water node in the eastern quadrant," he suggested through the earth barrier. "It would complement your secondary affinity better." Across the arena, Rachel moved with surprising speed toward a water node nestled near the boundary between forest and mountain terrain. 2 competitors were already approaching it from different directions, a water specialist from Serpentstone and a lightning user from Gravehold. "The princess thinks she can claim water?" "That's my domain," the Serpentstone student called out, his hands already drawing moisture from the air to form ice javelins. Rachel didn't respond verbally. Instead, she channeled pure light through her palm, creating not a weapon but a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded both opponents. While they were disoriented, she reached the node first, placing her hand on its surface to establish connection. In the central volcanic zone, Arya had reached her first fire node. The heat was intense enough that the air shimmered around her, but she showed no discomfort as she connected with the pulsing ruby energy. Finally, she sighed, the flames responding to her presence by rising higher, taking shapes that mimicked her movements. Something worth working with. A fellow fire user, a boy with flame-red hair and a nervous expression, approached cautiously. "Arya Gu?" "I'm Jinho from." "I know who you are," Arya interrupted, not unkindly. "You have potential, but your control needs work. I was hoping we might cooperate. Control adjacent nodes to create a larger fire territory?" Arya considered this, watching as across the arena, competitors were already forming similar alliances of convenience. "Cooperation has merit," she acknowledged. "Take the node to the southeast. I'll handle the northwest one. When we've secured both, we'll establish a connection." Jinho's face lit up with relief and excitement. "I won't let you down." "See that you don't," Arya replied, already moving toward her next target. By the 20-minute mark, clear patterns had emerged across the battlefield. Most contestants had claimed one or perhaps two nodes, establishing small territories they struggled to maintain against incursions. But 3 competitors had created notably larger spheres of influence. Lucifer had secured his triangle of nodes, one each of earth, wind, and fire, and was systematically expanding outward, his multi-elemental control allowing him to adapt his approach for each new conquest. When a water specialist attempted to flood his territory, Lucifer redirected the attack into carefully positioned channels that actually strengthened his earth barriers. When an air user tried to disrupt his wind nodes, Lucifer incorporated the foreign currents into his own patterns, effectively turning his opponent's strength against them. Rachel had transformed her initial water node into the center of an expanding network. Golden-infused water flowed outward along channels she created, reaching additional nodes and gradually bringing them under her control. When a forest node connected to her network, the trees began producing blossoms that emitted pure light, creating zones where darkness couldn't penetrate. Indeed, there was something unmistakably cleansing about Rachel's approach. Areas under her control seemed brighter, more vibrant, as if the elements themselves were being restored to some idealized state. Competitors who ventured into her territory often found themselves hesitating, their aggressive intent temporarily forgotten as they experienced an unusual sense of peace. Arya controlled the volcanic zone completely, with assistance from Jean Ho, who had successfully claimed a secondary fire node as promised. The 2 Starcrest students had created a blazing territory that none had successfully penetrated, fire nodes pulsing in synchronized rhythms under their command. Inside her fiery domain, Arya had created a spectacular display of elemental artistry. Flames twisted into complex patterns above her head, forming shapes that resembled creatures from ancient mythology, phoenixes, dragons, and more abstract forms that seemed to dance to some unheard rhythm. "Show off," Jean Ho commented good-naturedly as he maintained his position at the secondary node. "Presentation matters," Arya replied with a grin. "Besides, it keeps our opponents guessing about what's decorative and what's a trap." The final phase of the event introduced a new challenge: elemental instability. The nodes began pulsing more erratically, requiring constant adjustment from their controllers to maintain harmony. "What's happening?" Jean Ho called out in alarm as his fire nodes suddenly flared, nearly overwhelming his control. "Phase 3, Arya replied grimly. "They're testing our adaptability. Stay focused." Across the arena, competitors scrambled to adjust to the fluctuations. Many lost control entirely, their carefully established territories collapsing as nodes rejected their influence. Some more experienced participants managed to maintain basic connection but were forced to abandon expansion efforts to focus on stability. Lucifer adapted seamlessly, his expression unchanged as he calmly adjusted his multi-elemental balance. If anything, he seemed to anticipate the changes, his 6 elements shifting in perfect response to each new pattern. "He knew," muttered a nearby competitor, watching in disbelief as Lucifer not only maintained control but continued to expand his territory. "He must have studied previous year's tournaments. Or he just learns that quickly," replied another, respect mixing with envy in their voice. Rachel's network trembled under the instability but held, her recent breakthrough to first-stage integration allowing her to maintain more complex connections than would have been possible at high silver rank. Her pure light served as a stabilizing influence, calming the erratic pulses within her domain. "Adaptation is key," she murmured to herself, making minute adjustments to the flow patterns. Where before she had emphasized expansion, now she focused on reinforcing existing connections, creating redundant pathways that could compensate for unstable nodes. A small group of competitors who had lost their own territories gathered at the edge of Rachel's domain, watching her work with academic interest. "She's using harmonic wave theory," one observed. "See how she's creating interference patterns to cancel out the instability?" "That's university-level elemental physics," another replied, impressed despite himself. "No wonder she made it to integration rank." Arya struggled more visibly with the fluctuations. Despite her mastery of fire, the unpredictable surges tested the limits of her white rank capabilities. Twice she had to abandon outer nodes to prevent cascade failures within her network. "Jean Ho," she called out, seeing her partner's control slipping. Focus on pure containment. Direction doesn't matter now, just keep it from breaking free. The young fire mage nodded, sweat pouring down his face as he concentrated all his effort on maintaining the most basic connection with his node. Even that was proving difficult as the ruby energy pulsed erratically, flaring and dimming in unpredictable patterns. Arya herself was forced to abandon her elaborate fire sculptures, diverting all her attention to stabilizing her primary node. Her territory contracted, but what remained stayed firmly under her control, quality over quantity becoming her necessary strategy. "We can't hold this forever," Jinho warned, his voice strained. "We don't need forever," Arya replied through gritted teeth. "Just longer than most of them." When the final signal sounded, ending the event, the rankings were clear. Lucifer had dominated through superior strategy and multi-elemental versatility, his control extending across multiple environmental zones. Rachel secured second place, her innovative integration of pure light with conventional elements creating a resilient network that weathered the instability phase impressively. Arya claimed third, her absolute mastery within her specialized domain compensating for its more limited extent. Chapter 320, Tactical Siege. The fourth event of the Inter Academy Festival transformed the arena into a battlefield of strategy and raw power. Tactical Siege featured teams of 5 students, with one team defending a fortress containing 3 objective points while the attacking team attempted to capture them within 15 minutes. Jack Blazespout stood at the staging area, white flames dancing between his fingertips as he surveyed the fortress his team would be attacking. The low integration rank mage rolled his shoulders, the motion deliberate and focused. "Ren's inside," he said to his teammates. His god's eyes will have mapped every approach vector already. Jack's normally casual demeanor had shifted to something sharper, more predatory. "We hit from multiple angles. Overload his perception." When the signal sounded, Jack launched forward with explosive acceleration. White flames, his nirvana flames, erupted around his hands, not illusory but intensely real, burning with a purifying heat that few could withstand. The northern wall of the fortress loomed before him, reinforced stone designed to repel conventional attacks. Jack didn't slow. His right hand swept forward, white flames condensing into a concentrated stream that struck the wall with surgical precision. Where the flames touched, stone didn't simply burn, it purified, molecular bonds breaking down as impurities were burned away. A 6-foot section of wall began to glow white-hot, weakening structurally. Inside the fortress, Renkagu stood motionless, his god's eyes active as he tracked the approaching attackers through solid walls. He registered Jack's assault on the northern section immediately, calculating angle of attack, probable breach point, and time until penetration. "Northern breach imminent," he communicated to his teammates without turning his head. "Leeway, reinforcement required." Ren's body blurred as he activated Collapsing Step, the first movement of his Void Fist art. Space contracted around him, distance between points temporarily shortening. He crossed 30 meters instantaneously, appearing at the threatened section as the wall began to give way. Jack burst through the weakened wall in a shower of superheated stone fragments, white flames wreathing his body. He registered Ren's presence immediately, adjusting his trajectory mid-lunge to account for the defender's position. Predictable response time, Jack noted, his flames intensifying. Even with spatial manipulation. Ren didn't waste energy on reply. His violet eyes tracked Jack's movement with perfect precision, calculating vectors and force application. His right hand swept forward, fingers spread as he activated Event Horizon, the second movement of his art. The space around Jack distorted subtly, time flowing fractionally slower within the affected zone. To observers, Jack's movements appeared to drag slightly, his acceleration dampened. To Jack himself, nothing seemed changed, but his body suddenly responded a crucial half-second slower than his mind commanded. Jack recognized the spatial manipulation immediately. Rather than fighting against it, he channeled more power into his nirvana flames, the white fire expanding outward in a pressurized wave. The flames didn't attempt to burn Ren directly but instead superheated the air around them both, creating a rapidly expanding pressure front. The explosive force disrupted Ren's concentration momentarily, weakening the time dilation effect. Jack seized the opportunity, diving past Ren toward the first objective, a glowing crystal mounted on the far wall. His hand closed around it just as Ren recovered. First objective secured, Jack announced, the crystal pulsing with recognition of capture. Ren's expression remained unchanged, but his tactical approach shifted instantly. Rather than attempting to reclaim the lost objective, he used Void Collapse, his third movement, to instantly strengthen the structural integrity of passages leading to the remaining objectives. Space itself compressed around key doorways and corridors, making what appeared to be normal-sized openings functionally narrower. Anyone attempting to pass through would find themselves compressed uncomfortably, their movements restricted by spatial distortion. Jack recognized the defensive redeployment. Kai, he called to his teammate who had followed through the breach, phase approach to second objective. They're conceding the first to fortify the others. Across the fortress, Seola faced a different challenge. Her team had defensive responsibility against Ian and Aaron's group. She stood on the second level of the fortress, her sword drawn but held in a relaxed position. The heavenly sword's soul-body gift manifested as a subtle luminous quality that extended beyond her physical form, her blade appearing simultaneously solid and conceptual. When warnings came of the initial breach at the eastern approach, Seola didn't rush to intercept. Instead, she executed a precise series of cuts through the air, not random movements but deliberate patterns that established conceptual boundaries throughout the surrounding space. Her blade moved with impossible precision, each stroke defining an invisible line that carried the essence of her cutting intent. These weren't mere gestures but the manifestation of Skyward Lotus's first petal, establishing zones where her sword's influence extended beyond its physical reach. Anyone crossing these boundaries without her permission would experience the effect of a perfectly executed cut, not from the physical blade, but from the conceptual essence of sharpness she had embedded in space itself. Ian Vizirian approached the second level with cautious determination. His draconic heritage manifested in subtle scales appearing along his forearms, his senses heightened beyond human norm. He paused at the stairwell, nostrils flaring as he detected something unusual in the air currents. Sword boundaries ahead, he murmured to Aaron, who advanced beside him. Not visible, but they're there. She's established cutting zones throughout the approach. Aaron nodded, dark mana gathering around his axe. The Eclipse Cleaver Art's second movement activated as shadows deepened around the weapon, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. I'll create a shadow corridor, Aaron said quietly. Your draconic scales should provide enough protection for what gets through. The Dark Knight swept his axe in a precise arc, darkness flowing from the blade like liquid shadow. The darkness didn't attack Seola's sword boundaries but instead flowed around them, identifying the precise locations of the invisible cutting lines and creating a narrow pathway of shadow between them. Ian followed close behind Aaron, his body partially transformed as scales covered vital areas. Draconic eyes pierced the darkness, tracking the safe path Aaron was creating. When they reached a junction, Aaron paused, sensing a more complex boundary arrangement ahead. Seola stood at the end of the corridor, sword held vertically before her. She hadn't moved to intercept them directly, but her presence wasn't passive. The second petal of her art had activated, her blade now tracing circles rather than lines. These created not just boundaries but overlapping fields that could activate in sequence, like cascading tripwires. Clever approach, Seola acknowledged, her voice calm despite the imminent confrontation. Few identify the boundaries so accurately. Ian stepped forward, his draconic transformation intensifying as he activated Dragon's Embrace. Flames erupted around his arms as scales covered his entire upper body, his features sharpening as draconic characteristics became dominant. Your sword establishes conceptual cutting, Ian replied, heat shimmering around him. But concepts can be burned away with sufficient heat. He launched forward suddenly, flames trailing from his fists as he charged directly into Seola's boundary field. The first invisible line activated as expected, a perfect cutting force slicing across his scaled chest. Blood sprayed from the wound, but the draconic protection prevented the cut from reaching vital organs. The second and third boundaries activated in sequence, each cutting deeper than the last. Ian's momentum slowed but didn't stop, his draconic regeneration already working to close the wounds as he pushed forward. Seola's expression showed genuine surprise at his persistence. She shifted stance, moving into the third petal of her art, Divine Gale. Her sword movements accelerated beyond normal perception, the blade leaving traces of light as it established not just static boundaries but actively moving cutting forces that surrounded her position. Ian and Aaron found themselves facing what appeared to be a whirlwind of cutting edges, an approach that couldn't be navigated even with Aaron's shadow corridors. The conceptual cutting had become too dense, too mobile to predict. In response, Ian gathered his remaining draconic power for one final push. Flames concentrated around his body as he executed the most powerful technique of Legend of Prominence, Infernal Ascent. The heat became so intense that the air visibly distorted, his draconic form wreathed in flames hot enough to potentially disrupt even conceptual cutting. Aaron provided support by activating Absolute Night, the fifth movement of Eclipse Cleaver. Darkness enveloped the corridor completely, temporarily obscuring even Seola's perception of her own cutting fields. In that moment of sensory disruption, Ian launched forward, flames burning through several layers of cutting boundaries simultaneously. Seola responded with perfect composure, executing Skyward Fall, the fourth petal of her art. Her blade moved in a downward arc of such perfect alignment that it cut through both Aaron's darkness and Ian's flames, a singular stroke that contained the essence of absolute severance. The collision of techniques created a shockwave that cracked the surrounding walls. Ian's flames were partially disrupted, his advance halted mere meters from the objective. Aaron's darkness dissipated, revealing Seola standing untouched between the attackers and their goal, her sword held in the completion position of her technique. Impressive approach, she acknowledged, genuine respect in her tone. But insufficient. Elsewhere in the arena, Jack Blazespout's team continued their assault on Ren's defenses. Having secured the first objective, they now focused on the upper level, where the second crystal waited. Ren had anticipated this, using his spatial manipulation to create choke points that would funnel attackers into predictable paths. Jack analyzed the spatial distortions with experienced eyes. He's compressed the approach corridors, he noted to his teammates. Anyone trying to pass through will be physically constrained. Rather than attempting to overcome this obstacle directly, Jack implemented an unexpected strategy. His Nirvana flames consolidated around his hands as he placed them against the ceiling, white fire burning upward with controlled intensity. Creating our own path, he explained as the flames began to burn through the floor of the level above. The white fire didn't spread uncontrolled but maintained a perfect circular shape, burning away impurities in the material while leaving a clean passage. Ren sensed this approach through his god's eyes, immediately calculating a counter-strategy. He couldn't reach the position in time to prevent the breach, so instead, he activated Void Rupture, the fourth movement of his art. This technique didn't target Jack directly but instead disrupted the spatial continuity above the burning section, creating a zone where conventional movement would become unpredictable. When Jack's flames finally burned through, creating an opening to the upper level, he leapt upward, directly into Ren's spatial trap. As he passed through the distorted zone, his sense of direction became compromised. What appeared to be vertical movement translated into horizontal displacement, causing him to emerge 10 meters away from his intended position. Spatial redirection, Jack muttered, quickly reorienting himself. Clever application. Ren stood between Jack and the second objective, his stance relaxed but ready. Unconventional approach, he acknowledged. But predicted. Jack didn't waste energy on banter. His Nirvana flames intensified, white fire spreading outward in patterns designed to limit Ren's movement options rather than attack him directly. The flames didn't burn randomly but established strategic positions, creating areas that even Ren would find difficult to traverse without consequence. Ren recognized the containment strategy immediately. Rather than attempting to counter it directly, he activated Collapsing Step again, but with a variation. Instead of using it to relocate himself, he applied the spatial compression to the objective crystal itself, momentarily reducing the distance between it and his position while simultaneously extending the distance between the crystal and Jack. This spatial manipulation created a momentary advantage that Ren exploited with perfect timing, placing himself directly between Jack and the crystal just as the distance returned to normal. The maneuver demonstrated mastery of his triple affinity, using space, time, and gravity in perfect harmony. Jack responded with increasing intensity, his nirvana flames now burning with blinding brightness. The white fire didn't just generate heat but actively purified the surrounding air, creating zones where oxygen concentration increased dramatically. This didn't harm Ren directly but created the conditions for a more powerful conflagration. When Jack finally unleashed his attack, it wasn't a direct assault but a carefully calculated chain reaction. The nirvana flames ignited the oxygen-enriched zones sequentially, creating a series of controlled explosions that disrupted Ren's spatial perception and forced him to adjust his position repeatedly. In the moment of disruption, Jack's teammate Kai phased through a nearby wall, bypassing the spatial distortions entirely and appearing directly beside the objective. His hand closed around the crystal before Ren could reposition. Second objective secured, Kai announced as the crystal acknowledged the capture. With 2 objectives claimed and 5 minutes remaining, the match intensified. Ren's team concentrated all remaining resources on protecting the final objective, creating layered defenses that would require exceptional coordination to breach. Jack gathered his team for a final push, knowing that Ren would have predicted standard approaches. "We need simultaneous pressure from multiple vectors," he instructed. "Not just different directions, but different planes of attack." The final assault demonstrated why Jack's team had earned their reputation. They attacked from 3 directions simultaneously, conventional horizontal approaches combined with a vertical descent from the level above and an unconventional diagonal vector through a section of wall that Jack's flames had strategically weakened. Ren's defense was equally impressive. His god's eyes tracked all approaching threats, allowing him to prioritize responses based on probability of success. His spatial manipulation created zones of altered gravity that slowed the vertical assault, while temporal distortions complicated timing for the coordinated attack. The match concluded with Jack's team securing the final objective with just 20 seconds remaining. 1. Jack Blazespout's team. 2. Ren Kagu's team. 3. Seola's team. 4. Ian Vizirian and Aaron Marriott's team.